Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Midnight Stories. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I thought it would be nice if everyone could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Alright, let's get comfy, relax, and begin. When I was about 7 years old, my two older brothers and I spent a lot of time playing in this big, empty field that people around our neighborhood used as an unofficial motocross track. It was rough, full of dirt jumps and ruts where dirt bikes had raced over and over. The ground was loose in places, and the smell of fresh dirt mixed with grass was always in the air. The place wasn't really meant for kids like us to hang out there, but we didn't care. It was our playground. One afternoon, we decided to do something different. For reasons none of us fully understood, we set out to dig a tunnel. It seemed like a cool idea at the time, a secret passage underground like something out of an adventure story. We had no tools other than old sticks in our hands, but we were determined. We figured we could get a few feet in, maybe even hide from each other or pretend we were explorers. We worked hard, taking turns digging and clearing dirt out of the hole. The sun was hot and high, beating down on us through a sky that was bright blue with no clouds. I remember the heat clinging to my skin, making my shirt stick to my back as I crouched down, pushing dirt out of the way. The dirt smelled fresh but dry, dusty, like the kind that makes your nose itch when you breathe it in. Every few minutes, we'd brush dirt from our faces, and little clouds of dust would float in the air around us. It took hours of digging, but we managed to create a tunnel that went in about 6 feet, maybe a little more, and it was about 2 feet high, just enough for us to crawl inside if we stayed low. We hadn't thought through the safety part. None of us knew anything about supporting tunnels or anything like that. It was just dirt piled over loosely, held together by the dry grass and whatever roots were tangled in the ground above. I was the youngest and smallest, so I ended up right at the very front of the tunnel, digging and trying to make it longer. My brothers were behind me, scooping dirt out and pushing it aside. I was excited, proud of how far we'd gotten. Suddenly, without warning, the tunnel collapsed. It started with a small rumble that I barely noticed, but then I felt the ground above me shift and fall. Dirt, roots, and chunks of earth poured down, closing off the tunnel entrance right in front of me. 1 second I was crawling, and the next I was buried. Everything went instantly black. The weight of the dirt was crushing. It pressed down on my chest and shoulders so hard that I couldn't move at all. My arms were pinned tight against my sides, and my legs felt frozen beneath the heavy soil. The air around me was thick and dusty, and it was hot, like being inside a furnace. I couldn't see anything. It was just endless dark and unbearable heat. I tried to breathe, but the dirt was all around my face. I could feel it pressing against my mouth and nose, making it hard to pull in fresh air. The dust made me cough and gag. Each breath I managed felt like I was sucking in tiny particles of dirt that scraped my throat and burned my lungs. The harder I coughed, the more I hurt myself, and then my stomach cramped painfully, making it even harder to breathe. My heart started pounding like a drum. It felt like it would burst right out of my chest. Panic swept through me like a wave I couldn't fight. My whole body shook as I tried to push the dirt away from my face with my hands. I could feel the soil shifting just a little under my fingers, but my arms were too weak, too pinned down to move enough. The darkness around me wasn't just black. It started to turn a deep, glowing red. I don't think it was actually red, but that's how it felt in my mind. The heat and the panic mixed together, making everything inside my head spin and blur. I didn't know how long I was trapped there. Seconds, minutes, maybe longer. Time lost all meaning. In my 7-year-old mind, the red darkness and the unbearable heat made me think I was burning alive in hell. I was terrified that this was how I would die. I imagined flames licking at me from all sides, and the heavy dirt above was like the roof of some underground furnace. I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. My breathing got shallower and shallower. I was gasping, trying to get more air, but it was no use. The soil was so tight against my body, I couldn't even wiggle. I tried to stay calm, tried to tell myself to breathe slowly, but the fear was too strong. I felt my body begin to shut down from the lack of oxygen. I don't remember crying, but I probably was. I was so scared I couldn't think straight. The only sounds I could hear were the faint rumbling of the dirt around me and my own breath, ragged and shallow. The dirt was pressing so hard, I started to lose feeling in my fingers and toes. I felt like I was disappearing, fading away. At some point, the pressure started to ease a tiny bit. I wasn't sure if it was real or if my mind was playing tricks on me, but then I felt it, a sudden tug on my foot. Someone was grabbing me. I don't know how long it had been, but it was my brothers. They had heard the collapse and started digging furiously. They pushed aside the dirt, breaking through the wall that had buried me. Their hands reached in and grabbed one of my feet, pulling me slowly out of the dirt prison. As I was pulled free, the world exploded back into light and air. The cool breeze hit my face like a splash of water. I gasped in huge, desperate breaths, coughing and choking on the fresh air. The ground beneath me felt solid, and I could finally move my arms and legs again. My brothers were yelling, but I was too shocked to answer. My body was trembling all over. I felt wetness spreading down my legs and realized I'd lost control and peed myself in the fear and pressure. I was embarrassed, but it didn't matter at that moment. I was alive. We didn't tell our parents what happened. We were too scared and ashamed. Instead, I just went home quietly and got hosed down in the backyard to clean off all the dirt. I remember the cold water on my skin felt like a blessing, washing away the dirt and the heat, but not the fear. Even years later, whenever I think about that day, the memory hits me like a punch. The black, hot darkness, the crushing weight, the red, glowing my mind. It was the closest I ever came to dying, buried alive under the dirt. The day taught me how fragile life really is. It also taught me how strong the human will can be, because even in the darkest, most terrifying moments, I survived. I don't know how I survived, but I did, and that's what matters. From then on, I never looked at dirt or tunnels the same way again. That old motocross field wasn't just a playground anymore. It was the place that almost swallowed me whole. About 10 years ago, something happened in my family that I still think about often. It's a story my mother told me not long ago, but the event itself dates back a decade. It's one of those stories that felt so strange and unsettling because nothing about it fits into any normal explanation, and yet it didn't feel like a ghost story or anything supernatural. It felt real, but deeply strange. My cousin was about 17 or 18 at the time. She had a good life, really close to the family, especially to my dad's sister, our aunt. They had a special bond. My cousin often babysat the aunt's young children, who were all under 4 years old. The kids loved her, and she was like an older sister to them. The aunt's house was undergoing renovations at that time, so there was a lot of noise, dust, and constant activity around the place. Construction workers came and went daily, and the house itself was almost unrecognizable compared to before. It was the kind of project that took months, with walls torn down and rebuilt, windows replaced, floors ripped up and redone. The family was excited about the new changes, even though it was inconvenient. Then the accident happened. It was a bad car crash. My cousin was seriously hurt and spent weeks in the hospital. Everyone was hopeful at first, but after some time, she passed away. It was devastating for everyone, especially the aunt. Losing someone so young, so full of life, shook the entire family to its core. We were all left to grapple with the loss in different ways. A few weeks after she died, something strange began to happen. The construction at the aunt's house continued as planned. The workers came every day, the same crew, doing their job. But one of the workers called the aunt one afternoon while she was at work, sounding confused and a bit uneasy. He told her that a teenage girl had been showing up at the construction site, walking around the house. At first, it was just once or twice, but then the visits became more frequent, several times a week over the span of a couple of weeks. The worker described the girl carefully. She had long brown hair, wore a red baseball cap, denim dungarees, and a white jacket. At first, my aunt thought it might be some neighbor's kid or maybe a friend of one of the workers. She asked if the girl was causing any trouble or just hanging around. The worker said she didn't say much, just walked the property slowly, sometimes pausing to look at the house, then leaving. She never interacted with the workers or anyone else. It wasn't like she was sneaking around or trying to cause damage, just quietly walking. What made it really strange was the description. My aunt recognized it immediately. It matched my cousin perfectly. The outfit, the hair, the way the girl was described matched how my cousin looked all the time. The red baseball cap was her favorite, something she wore almost daily. The aunt shared this with her family, and they all agreed the description was uncanny. When my aunt got home, she showed the workers a picture of my cousin. They all nodded, saying it was the same girl they had seen. None of them had known about my cousin's accident at that time. The workers hadn't heard about her passing. It was just coincidence that the construction was going on during those weeks. My family never believed in ghosts or anything like that. We're practical people. We don't talk about spooky stuff or pretend to see things that aren't there. So this story freaked me out when I first heard it. It wasn't because of ghosts or anything supernatural, but because it was a real mystery no one could explain. The visit stopped after a while, and the house was finally finished. The family moved in, and life went back to some kind of normal. But no one ever forgot those weeks when a teenage girl appeared at the site, walking silently, watching the construction. What's strange, though, is that the workers described her behavior as almost cautious, like she was trying to understand the changes happening to the house. The way she walked around, it was as if she was checking something, maybe the rooms, or how the house looked after being torn apart and rebuilt. She didn't hurry, didn't run away when someone noticed her, just kept walking slowly. Some people suggested it might have been a coincidence. Maybe a local girl who liked to explore the construction site. But the outfit, the red baseball cap, the dungarees, it was too exact a match to be a coincidence. And the timing, so soon after my cousin passed away, made it even harder to ignore. The thing that haunted me the most wasn't just the fact that this girl showed up. It was how real it felt, like my cousin's presence lingered there, tied to the house she loved and the family she cared about. The construction was changing the home she had known, and somehow she kept coming back to see it. Maybe she didn't understand she was gone, or maybe she just wanted to be near her family's home one last time. I don't know if it was her spirit or something else entirely, but it didn't feel like a ghost story. It felt like a young girl caught between worlds, confused and trying to hold on to the life she lost. The house still stands today, fully finished and lived in. The family keeps her memory alive, but that strange few weeks will always be a part of their story. A quiet, unexplainable reminder that sometimes life and death don't have clear boundaries, and some things don't fit into neat explanations. For me, that story changed how I think about loss. It's not always about saying goodbye. Sometimes it's about holding on, even when you have to let go. While I was in high school, I had a really good friend who lived next door to a house that had been up for sale for as long as I could remember. It wasn't just the usual for sale sign that stayed there for months or even years, but something about the house itself made it feel off. People would move out of it suddenly, in the middle of the night, without saying a word to anyone. It wasn't like they just left town or went on vacation. It was like they vanished. The house never had the same owner for more than 6 months at a time, and this had been going on for a couple of years. Everyone in the neighborhood kind of whispered about it, but no one really talked about it openly. It just sat there, empty most of the time, with its windows dark and its curtains drawn tight. My friend's name was Jake. He was the kind of guy who loved exploring weird places and getting into trouble just to see what happened. One cold December evening, when the sky had already turned dark and the air was sharp enough to sting your skin, Jake and I were just hanging out at his house, bored out of our minds. The usual places we go to mess around were either too crowded or closed for the night. So Jake, with that half smirk he always had when he was about to do something dumb, suggested we check out the house next door, the empty one that everyone avoided. I wasn't sure why he wanted to go inside. The house looked old, sure, but it didn't look dangerous. It was built maybe in the 1950s, a classic craftsman-style house with those wide eaves and a big front porch. The paint was peeling in some places and the lawn was overgrown, but otherwise it looked like a normal house from the outside. The neighborhood was older and well-kept, and Jake's house was similar in style. The kind of place where kids played outside until the street lights came on and neighbors waved to each other over their fences. We circled the house to the back because the front door was locked tight, like it always was. Around the side, we found a dog door near the bottom of the back door. Jake was small enough to squeeze through it, so he said he'd crawl in and unlock the door from the inside. I stood just behind the house, peeking through a dusty window, waiting for him to come back and let me in. The backyard was overrun with dead leaves and broken branches, the kind of mess no one wanted to bother cleaning up. The air smelled faintly of damp wood and something else, something hard to describe, like old dust mixed with mold and something metallic, almost like rust. After a few minutes, I heard the creak of the door swinging open, and Jake whispered for me to come in. The inside of the house was dark, colder than the outside, and smelled like the air had been trapped there for years. There was no electricity, so we had to rely on the weak light from the street lamps outside, filtering through the windows. The house was plain inside, nothing special. The wallpaper was faded and peeling in corners. The wooden floorboards creaked when we stepped on them. Dust coated every surface, and the furniture, what little was left, was covered with white sheets stained yellow from years of neglect. The kitchen was at the back of the house, and there was this old built-in breakfast nook pressed against a large picture window. I remember it because it was the only part of the house that seemed kind of homey, even though the rest of the place felt abandoned. The table and benches were made of dark wood, worn down but still sturdy. The window looked out onto the street, and through it, the street light outside cast a dull glow into the kitchen. Jake and I sat on the floor across from the table, just talking. It wasn't like we had any good reason to sit there. No snacks, no music, no flashlight, just the two of us making small talk to kill time. Maybe we were just bored, or maybe it felt like a secret little hideout. I don't know why we stayed there so long. Suddenly, without warning, Jake let out a scream. It was the kind of scream that punches the air, raw and terrified. At the same moment, everything went black for me. Not like blinking or closing my eyes, but real, total darkness. My vision disappeared completely. I wasn't just blind, though. My whole body was covered in this sickly coldness, like being submerged in icy water. It wasn't just cold. It was a thick, heavy cold that wrapped around me like a sticky blanket, pressing into my skin and bone. I felt like I was freezing from the inside out. Panic exploded in me. I started screaming, but it felt like the sound was trapped in my throat. I couldn't move properly, and I couldn't see anything. Then, suddenly, I felt Jake's hand grab mine. His grip was firm, pulling me with force. Slowly, the cold started to fade, and my vision began to return. When I finally opened my eyes, I realized we were outside, standing under the street light by the front of the house. It was winter, and the air should have felt cold, but inside the house, it had felt like something else entirely, something unnatural. I looked down at my hands, which were still trembling. Jake looked as scared as I felt. He wasn't the type to scare easily. He was usually the one daring me to do crazy stuff. But now, his face was pale, and his eyes darted nervously around the quiet street. The whole time after that, I kept trying to remember exactly what had happened inside. Jake finally told me that while we were sitting and talking, this black thing had come out from under the table. It didn't have a clear shape. It was more like a shadow shaped like a girl. It sat right on top of me, and I was completely frozen. Apparently, I started groping around with my eyes wide open, but not seeing anything, as if I was blind. Jake said he was so freaked out, he just grabbed my hand and pulled me out as fast as he could. For days afterward, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still with me, a shadow clinging just out of sight. The blackness I'd felt wasn't just a trick of the mind. It was real, thick, almost like it had weight. I couldn't explain it, and that scared me the most. I never went near that house again. Even passing it from the street made my skin crawl. I quickened my pace, avoiding eye contact with the windows. It stayed empty for months after that, and eventually it was torn down. Some new development went up in its place, but I never forgot that night. What disturbed me the most was not the shadow or the cold itself, but how real it felt. There was no ghost or monster story, no fairy tale explanation. Just something wrong in that house, something that wasn't meant to be seen or touched. Even now, Years later, when it's quiet at night and I'm alone, I sometimes feel that same weight of cold and darkness pressing down on me, like a reminder of that night. It's like the house left a piece of itself with me, and I don't think it will ever let go. When I think back on that night, it still makes my skin crawl. It wasn't me who saw it all happen. It was my sister. But I was there. I remember every second of it like it happened yesterday. Growing up, my sister had an imaginary friend she called E. E wasn't a typical imaginary friend for a little kid. She said E was an older lady, kind and gentle. My sister would talk to her all the time, play with her, and even tell me about the things they did together. It was like E was a real person, not just some figment of her imagination. But around the time my sister turned 4, she stopped mentioning E, like she had just disappeared. We thought that was the end of it, but looking back, it wasn't. Fast forward to when my sister was about 10 years old. We lived in the same house our mom grew up in, a big old place with creaky wooden floors and narrow hallways that always seemed darker than they should be, especially at night. Mom wasn't home that evening because she got a sudden call. Grandpa was at the nursing home and something was wrong. So she left with Pops, driving off fast like she had been punched in the gut. My sister and I shared a room back then, one of those rooms with 2 beds pushed close together but separated by a little nightstand. She was in her bed, probably reading or drawing, and I was in the other end of the house, somewhere in the living room. The house was quiet except for the usual nighttime noises. The pipes creaking, the old wooden floor settling, maybe the wind brushing the windows. Then I heard it. From our room, the radio clicked on, not just quietly, like someone had flipped a switch. It turned on, blasted static noise at full volume, then suddenly dropped all the way down and went off. Then it did it again, and again, 3 times in a row. I froze for a second, thinking maybe my sister was playing around with the radio to scare me. But as I got closer to the door, that feeling in my stomach twisted into something else, something cold and heavy. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. My sister was sitting on her bed, her face as white as the sheets beneath her. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't scared like me. She just sat there, staring at nothing, her eyes wide and empty. The radio was on the nightstand, the same one we had shared since we were little. I walked over and grabbed it to unplug it, but it hit me there was no plug. The radio wasn't plugged into the wall. No cord trailing to an outlet anywhere. I pulled the radio apart a little, and there were no batteries inside. The only radio in the house was that one on the nightstand. It was impossible for it to turn on by itself, let alone blast that noise. I looked back at my sister, still sitting there pale and quiet. Her voice barely came out as she whispered. I saw her. It was E. I didn't understand then, but my heart was pounding. I grabbed the phone and called Mom, trying to keep my voice steady. She picked up, sounding rushed and worried. Mom told me something that made the whole thing even more strange. Grandpa had just passed away. The call she had gotten was about that. I hung up and stood there, trying to process it all. My sister's imaginary friend, the impossible radio turning on and off, and now Grandpa's death. It felt like the air in the room had changed, like something unseen had moved through us. A few days later, we went to the funeral. It was crowded, a mix of family and old friends. After the service, a relative approached us with something wrapped carefully in an old cloth. It was a photograph, yellowed and worn with age. My sister looked at it, her eyes lighting up in a strange way. "That's E," she said softly. I squinted at the photo. It was a wedding picture of my grandparents. My mom's mom and dad on their wedding day, young and happy. The woman in the photo looked exactly like the way my sister had described E, an older lady with a warm smile, gentle eyes, and that same calm presence. What made it even more eerie was that my grandmother had died when my mom was only 11, before I was even born. We lived in the same house my mom grew up in, but we had no pictures of her. Years ago, my step-grandmother had moved in and gotten rid of all the old photos and things. So this picture was one of the only remnants left. For the longest time, I thought my sister's imaginary friend was just a kid's fantasy. But that night with the radio, the picture, and everything happening around Grandpa's death, It was like the past was trying to reach out to us in a way none of us could explain. Since then, nothing else strange has happened with EE. But that night changed how I see things. Sometimes, the line between what's real and what isn't can blur. Not with ghosts or magic, just memories, feelings, and things left unsaid passing through in their own way. And that's the kind of scary that stays with you long after the noise stops. Every time I stay at my grandma's house, I hear someone walking upstairs. It's not loud or hurried, just slow, casual footsteps that start from one side of the room and walk all the way to the other side before stopping. This happens maybe twice a night, never more, and always in the same way. I didn't start hearing it until I was around 14. That was the year my grandparents made me sleep in a different room on the first floor. They had started sleeping in separate bedrooms, so my usual room was off limits. Both of their rooms were also on the first floor, so none of this made much sense to me, but I didn't argue. For as long as I can remember, I've been afraid of the upstairs at their house. I never knew why. I couldn't explain it, and no one ever pushed me to go up there alone. I just always felt uneasy, like something wasn't right. I refused to go upstairs by myself, and still do. I'm 23 now, and I won't go up there without someone else. There's one room that scares me more than the rest. A long, narrow bedroom at the end of the hall. The door opens into a small hallway. When you step in, there are closets on both the left and right sides. In the middle of the room is a bed pushed against the wall, and at the far end, opposite the door, is a window with thin, old curtains that barely block out the moonlight. My grandparents told me a story once about the previous owner's sons. They said those boys claimed to see a gorilla come out of the closet at night, dance around the room, and then go back inside. I thought it was just a silly story, something they made up to scare me. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling about that room, especially when I had to start sleeping in a room directly below it on the first floor. On my first night sleeping in that room, I lay in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet except for the ticking of an old clock in the living room. All the lights were off. The moonlight peeked through the curtains, casting long shadows across the floor. Then I heard it. Thump, thump, thump. The footsteps started at one end of the room upstairs. They were slow, casual, deliberate, almost like someone was pacing back and forth but calm. The sound moved closer, coming directly above me. The creaks and groans of the old house never sounded like this. This was different. I could tell immediately it wasn't just the house settling. The footsteps passed right above me, continuing to the other side of the room where they stopped. I lay frozen, heart pounding. I felt like my body had been drained of all energy except for my racing heart and the deafening silence that followed. The footsteps faded away, leaving me wide awake and terrified. I wasn't about to lie in that bed alone any longer. I got up and went down the hall to my grandpa's room. He was awake, reading a book with the dim light on. I told him what I'd heard, hoping for some explanation. He said the house was old and creaked a lot. He wasn't worried. To help me feel safer, he turned on the dining room light, which was just outside the door of the room I was supposed to sleep in. I nodded, trying to feel comforted, but when I went back to bed, the dread didn't leave. The footsteps started again. This time, they began from the opposite side, the end of the room where the window was. They moved over me again, just like before, slow and steady, until they reached the door. I held my breath, waiting for the sound to stop. But then I heard something worse. The steps continued down the stairs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Silence as it reached the landing. Then 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and silence again as it reached the first floor. I lay frozen on the bed, unable to move or even cry out. I stared at the door to my room, the dining room light casting a weak glow down the hallway. My vision blurred. My head spun. The air around me felt thick, heavy, like it was pressing in from all sides. Suddenly, I heard a scratching sound coming from inside my room. It wasn't quiet either. It was loud and deliberate. Scratching. The kind of sound you'd hear if someone were dragging their nails down wood. It was coming from my grandpa's gun case. The case was made of dark wood, old but well kept, standing against the wall near the bed. I knew exactly where the sound was coming from. I could hear the faint tapping of the case door shaking as the scratches went deeper and longer down its surface. It was as if something was clawing to get out. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My throat tightened up and panic took over. After what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to take a deep breath and let out a loud scream. Within seconds, my grandpa was at my side, flashlight in hand, checking the room. I pointed to the gun case, but when he looked, there was nothing there. No scratches, no marks, just the dark was staring back at us. He told me again that it was an old house, that sounds were easy to mistake in the dark. But I knew what I heard. I knew it wasn't the house. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Instead, I did something I still do whenever I stay there now. I drape a sheet over the side of the bed and sleep underneath it. I wrap myself tight in a thick comforter, put on headphones with white noise, and turn my back to the door. If something is in the room, at least I don't have to see it. The next morning, my grandpa told my grandma about what happened. She just laughed it off and said something about my cousin waking her up the last time she stayed there, because she heard footsteps too. That wasn't comforting. I stayed under the bed the whole rest of the week. Since that first night, I've been back to my grandma's house many times, and every time I hear those footsteps upstairs. I always hear them starting at one side of the long, narrow bedroom, moving slowly across the floor, stopping, and then sometimes moving back again. But I never hear the footsteps come down the stairs anymore. Maybe that was a one-time thing. Maybe it was a warning. Whatever it was, I don't want to know if it happens again. I now sleep on top of the bed instead of underneath it. It's a small comfort, but I still keep my back to the door and my headphones are always on. The footsteps don't seem to care about the dining room light or anything else that's supposed to make me feel safe. They just happen. I never look up at the ceiling or out the window. I don't try to listen closely. I just cover my ears, close my eyes, and hope it ends before I have to hear it again. The house is old and creaky, yes, but that sound, the slow, deliberate footsteps, doesn't belong to the house. It belongs to something else, something that walks back and forth every night, just out of sight, just above me. And no matter how many times I tell myself it's nothing, I know deep down that it's not. I don't know what it is or why it's there, but I know one thing for sure. I'm not safe upstairs, and I never will be. So I keep sleeping on the first floor, headphones on, back to the door, waiting for the footsteps to come again. Because they always do. Back in 2004, I was a 17-year-old girl from the country, just out of high school and fresh into college life in the city. I was excited but completely clueless. Growing up where I did, the city was like another world, bright lights, noise, people everywhere. I had heard stories, warnings, and plenty of advice, but I figured none of it applied to me. I was young, smart enough, and tough, or at least I thought I was. One night, maybe 2 or 3 weeks into my first semester, I made a terrible decision. It was around 1:30 in the morning, late for someone who'd spent her whole life in quiet places. I was coming back from a late study session with some classmates, and the bus that should have taken me back to campus wasn't running anymore. I thought, I can walk. It's not that far. How bad can it be? I didn't have a map, and I wasn't exactly sure where I was. I just had a vague sense of the general direction to my dorm. The moment I stepped out on that street, I realized the city wasn't quite what I imagined. The street lights were mostly busted. Broken glass glittered faintly on the cracked sidewalks. Trash piled up on the corners, spilling out from overflowing garbage cans. The smell was a mix of rotting food, damp concrete, and something else, something sharp and sour that made me wrinkle my nose. From the open windows of the old row houses lining the street, loud arguments spilled out, voices raised in anger and fear. The houses themselves looked ancient and falling apart, some with boards nailed across windows, others with peeling paint and sagging porches. I stopped for a moment to try and figure out where I was. The street signs were barely readable in the flickering streetlights. I realized I was completely lost. My heart started beating faster, and the weight of how dumb I'd been began to sink in. This wasn't a neighborhood you wanted to be in at night, or even during the day. I started walking again, trying to keep calm, telling myself I just needed to find a main road a busier street, anything. Then I heard the sound behind me, a car engine. I looked back, and a dark, beat-up sedan was following me slowly, almost creeping. The headlights were low, barely lighting the street ahead. I could see 5 men inside the car. They looked rough, the kind of people you see in crime shows or hear about on the news. Their faces were hard to read, but their eyes locked onto me, following my every move. The car matched my pace for almost an entire block. I kept my head down, trying not to panic, but my heart was pounding so loud I was sure they could hear it. I thought about running, but there was nowhere to go, narrow sidewalks, empty streets, no one around to help me. And running felt like it would just make me an easier target. As I got closer to the intersection, the car suddenly turned left and stopped right in the middle of the street, directly blocking my path. I froze. The street was dark except for a single dim porch light on a rundown house just past the car. I stood there, paralyzed, my mind completely blank. I wasn't thinking, just breathing hard and hoping this nightmare would end. It felt like forever, but I guess it was only a few minutes before the porch light flicked on. A man stepped out of the house, holding a bag of trash. He moved slowly, casually, like it was any normal night, and he was just taking out the garbage. The car's engine revved, the tires squeaked a little, and then they peeled away into the night. The moment the car was gone, everything hit me. I started shaking uncontrollably, tears pouring down my face. I was terrified, alone in a strange city, and completely lost. The man who had come out onto the porch noticed me. I could see him watching me from his steps, and after a few moments, he came over. I must have looked like a wreck, because he didn't say much, just listened as I tried to tell him what happened. I'm sure it was a mess of words and sobs, but he didn't judge or look away. He invited me inside his house, which was small and smelled like old wood and a hint of something spicy from the kitchen. He offered me a soda, which I took gratefully even though I was still shaking. His roommate was there, sitting on a worn-out couch, watching quietly but with kind eyes. Neither of them said much about what had happened, but they stayed close and made sure I was okay. After a while, they offered to walk me back to my dorm. The walk wasn't far, but it was enough to help me feel safer. We didn't say much, but their quiet presence was comforting. When we reached the dorm, they said goodbye, wished me luck, and mentioned something about their stand-up comedy show, something I couldn't go to because of my age. I never got their names, and I never saw them again, but I've never forgotten how much they helped me that night. That night changed me. It showed me how vulnerable I was and how lucky I got. I know I made a huge mistake walking alone in a part of the city I didn't understand. I was stupid and I own that. But I also know that if that man hadn't gone out to take out his trash, my story might have been very different, much darker. I'm not the same girl who thought she could handle anything. I'm more careful now. I pay attention and I don't take chances with my safety. That night was a hard lesson in how quickly things can go wrong and how sometimes strangers can be the ones who save you without even trying. Looking back, I'm just grateful to be here alive and well, with a clear memory of how fragile life can be and how important it is to listen to your instincts and to never underestimate the kindness of strangers, even in the darkest places. It was early morning, just before dawn, the kind of morning where everything is quiet but not quite peaceful. The street was still wet from overnight mist that clung to every surface like a thin veil, and the dim streetlights cast weak, yellow pools of light onto the pavement. I was walking to my usual bus stop, the kind of walk I'd done 100 times before, but this morning felt different. I had my headphones in, but wasn't really listening to anything, more lost in my own thoughts. My hand smelled faintly of banana because I was halfway through eating one, a quick breakfast before my long commute. The taste was sweet but a little mushy, and the peel hung loosely in my hand, ready to be tossed out. It was around 5 a.m., and everything was still dark except for the few flickering streetlights and the faint orange glow from the sky starting to brighten. The air was cool and damp, and I could see my breath puff out in little clouds as I walked. I was thinking about something stupid, honestly, whether I wanted my Starbucks coffee before I got on the bus or after. I've been running through my morning routine in my head like a script, trying to decide if I'd have time to stop or if I'd just wait until I got to work. The bus stop was only a few blocks from my apartment, and I liked to get there early, standing in the cold while scrolling through my phone. I was wearing my usual early morning outfit, baggy pants, a loose jacket, and a hat pulled low over my face. I was on my way to coach a high school practice later that morning, so I was dressed to be comfortable and low-key, not flashy at all. Honestly, I could have passed for a kid from the 90s hip-hop scene with the way I looked, except for my voice, which betrayed me as a woman. I didn't care much about appearances in the morning. I just wanted to get through the walk and catch my bus. As I approached the corner of my street, where the road bent sharply and the sidewalk was darker, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. To my left was an alley, a narrow, dirty little space between two buildings. It was always a little creepy, even during the day. I don't know why I looked, but I did, and that's when I saw him. A tall man stepped out from the shadows of that alley. His face was covered with a black mask, the kind that looked like something from a robbery or a horror movie. I barely had time to register it before his voice cut through the misty silence. He shouted at me to put down my purse, and the tone of his voice snapped me awake from my foggy state. Suddenly, everything became sharp. The cold air, the fear in my chest, the way my heart started pounding so loud, I thought it might burst. The gun he pointed at my head was real. I remember the way the metal gleamed in the low light, and how my hands still smelled sticky from the banana. My mind raced, but my mouth wouldn't stop talking. I told him I was putting my bags down where he wanted, trying to keep my voice calm, even though I felt like screaming inside. I agreed to walk over to him, to do exactly what he said. I don't know why I didn't try to run right away. Maybe it was shock, maybe it was fear. I just followed his orders, stepping toward the alley, feeling every step heavy and slow, like I was walking through water. He ordered me to get down on the ground. I dropped to my knees, and in my hands, the cold concrete pressing against my skin through my clothes. I could smell the dampness of the alley, the sour stench of trash, mixed with something sharper, like old urine. My breath came in shallow bursts, my heart hammering so hard I could feel in my throat. I started talking again, telling him my stuff was there, begging him to just take my things and go. But he wasn't having it. He screamed at me to shut up and then climbed on top of me, pressing the gun harder against my temple. His weight was heavy, the cold metal cold against my skin. The fear was overwhelming, but then something changed. For a moment, his eyes flicked to my face, and I swear he realized I was a woman. I don't know how or why I knew, but something in his expression shifted like a switch flipped in his mind. He stood up abruptly and pointed back down the alley, telling me to come with him. My stomach clenched. I knew what that meant. I'd heard about the recent string of sexual assaults in the neighborhood. People had been warned to be careful, even during the day. Now it was dark and early, and I was being forced down that alley by a man with a gun. Inside me, a voice screamed that I was not going down that alley without a fight. But another voice whispered back, reminding me that he had a gun and I was just one person. The man's voice echoed again, shouting at me to follow him. I started moving, telling him I was coming. I kept my voice steady, even as my heart pounded so loudly I thought he'd hear it. Then I saw my chance. As I took 2 small steps backward, I noticed he was focused on leading me down the alley. The gun was pointed ahead, not at me anymore. That was my moment. I tucked my head down and sprinted, running as fast as I could without thinking. The cold air hit my face, the mist swirling around me like a fog. My feet slapped against the pavement, the sound echoing off the buildings. I could hear a scream, high and sharp, my own voice breaking through the silence as I fled. I didn't stop until I was several blocks away, my lungs burning and my legs aching. I ducked into my apartment building and locked the door behind me, hands trembling as I tried to catch my breath. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see him there, but he was gone. An hour later, the police came by to check the alley. They found nothing but my discarded banana peel, brown and limp on the ground. The man was gone without a trace. I didn't sleep well for days. The adrenaline stayed with me like a shadow, making my skin crawl every time I thought about what could have happened. The what-ifs haunted me more than the event itself. What if I hadn't noticed him? What if I hadn't run when I did? What if it had ended differently? I'm lucky. I know that. The fear I felt is still there sometimes, but I remind myself that I fought, that I didn't give up, and that I'm still here. That morning changed me, made me more aware of the world's darkness, but it also showed me that even in the scariest moments, there's a chance to survive. And I hold on to that chance every day. My grandmother never forgot that night. She told me the story many times, always with the same quiet voice, as if the memory weighed on her like a heavy stone she carried inside. She said she swore by it until her dying day. It was during the war in London when my dad was just a baby, no more than a few months old. Back then, the city was in ruins. The sound of bombs falling was a daily thing. People lived in fear, waiting for the next air raid siren to wail and rushing to shelters underground. My grandmother's house was hit one night. She never really talked about how she lost it, but she said it was just gone. Nothing left but rubble and broken memories. After that, she had nowhere to go and stayed with a friend who lived in a safer part of town. Her friend was kind enough to take her in, but the house was full. It was a tall, old building with narrow, creaky stairs that twisted up to the top floor, where my grandmother and my dad were given a small room to sleep in. The room was cramped and smelled faintly of damp wood and old paint, but it was better than being out on the streets. My grandmother did her best to make it feel like home, even though her heart was heavy with worry. One evening, it was late, and the city was quiet except for the distant echoes of bombs falling somewhere far away. My grandmother was carrying my dad up the stairs to put him to bed. The baby was wrapped in a thin blanket, too young to understand the terror around him. She held him close, trying to soothe him with soft whispers and gentle rocking as she climbed the narrow staircase. The stairs were dimly lit by a single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting long, shaky shadows on the walls. The wood creaked under her feet with every step. She hadn't expected anything unusual, but as she reached the top landing, something caught her eye. A figure standing just ahead on the stairs. It wasn't a person she knew, and it wasn't anyone she had heard come into the house. The figure was solid and still, blocking the way to the room. It wasn't saying anything aloud, but somehow my grandmother felt a clear, urgent warning. Don't sleep in that room tonight. The feeling was so strong she froze for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't look away, didn't question what she saw. Instead, she took a quick step backward, clutching my dad tighter, and turned to hurry back down the stairs. Downstairs, she told her friend quietly but firmly that she and my dad would be sleeping in the sitting room that night. Her friend was annoyed. The sitting room was small and had no door, only a thin curtain separating it from the rest of the house. It wasn't ideal, and the friend had already set up the bedroom for them, but she agreed. The night dragged on slowly. My grandmother sat in the sitting room with my dad on her lap, listening to the wind howling outside and the distant thunder of explosions echoing through the city. The walls seemed to hold their breath, waiting for something to happen. Around midnight, the sound of a bomb exploded nearby shattered the silence. The house shook violently, and dust rained down from the ceiling. My grandmother grabbed my dad and pulled him close as debris fell around them. The roof above the bedroom where they were supposed to sleep caved in completely, crushing the room beneath it. If they had stayed in that room, my dad would have been killed instantly. Instead, they were safe, though shaken, sitting in the sitting room surrounded by the wreckage of the house. My grandmother never forgot the feeling of relief mixed with fear. It was like a thin line between life and death, and she had been pulled back from the edge without understanding why. After that night, she never doubted the warning she had felt on the stairs. She never explained how or why it happened, just that it did, and it saved her baby's life. The house was too damaged to live in anymore, so they found another place, and life went on. But the memory stayed with her, clear and sharp. She told me that story many times, always ending with the same thought. Sometimes in the darkest moments, you have to trust the feelings you can't explain, because they might just save your life. It was only about a week after I had gotten my CPR certification. I was still pretty new to it, still trying to feel confident that I could actually do it if someone needed me to. I kept thinking about how they taught us the steps over and over in class. The way to check the scene, the way to check for a pulse, how to breathe air into someone's lungs, how to push on their chest in the right rhythm. It all seemed so simple on paper. I hoped I'd never have to use it for real, but I figured if the moment came, I'd be ready. That day, I was out with a couple of friends at a thrift store looking for Halloween costumes. It was late afternoon. The air had that fall chill that made you want to wear a hoodie, but the sun was still shining weakly through the scattered clouds. The store was busy, but nothing crazy. People moved between racks of old clothes, flipping through dusty books, checking out random knickknacks. I was in the dressing room, trying on a couple of outfits. It was quiet and kind of cramped, just me and the soft hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Then suddenly, everything outside the dressing room seemed to go really still, like someone hit pause on the noise. I heard muffled voices, but they stopped quick. I figured something was up. I stepped out, and someone told me quietly that there was a person passed out in the parking lot. My heart immediately sped up. I had just gotten my CPR certification, so I knew I had to go help. I told my friends that I was certified and I'd go check it out. I asked someone else to call 911 right away. When I walked outside, the usual sounds of cars and people were there, but I couldn't see anyone on the ground. The parking lot was mostly full, but not packed, and I didn't spot anyone lying down or struggling. Then, a voice shouted from the far end of the lot. They said the person was inside a car that was parked alone, far away from the main building. I took off running toward that spot, my stomach twisting with a mix of fear and adrenaline. When I got there, I froze. The woman was slumped over against the passenger window of a dull, old sedan. Her skin was an eerie shade of blue, deep, unnatural blue that made my stomach turn. Her face was pressed against the glass, her mouth slightly open. There was no movement. Her eyes, barely visible through the grime and sweat, had those telltale red rings from drug use. But they looked almost purple because of how starved she was for oxygen. It was like looking at someone already halfway gone. Not just unconscious, but slipping away fast, possibly already dead. I knelt down and tried to calm myself. I took a deep breath and told myself what I'd learned in class. First, I needed to open the car door. It was unlocked, which was lucky. Inside, the air was thick and stale, smelling sharply of sickness and chemicals. Scattered across the passenger floorboard were used heroin needles, some empty pill bottles, and other drug paraphernalia. It was clear this wasn't the first time she'd been like this. I carefully turned her head to the side to check for a pulse. I remember that moment vividly because as I did, tears streamed down her cheeks. It was such a small, human thing amid all the horror, a sign of pain, or maybe a final goodbye. Her eyes fluttered a bit, but there was no real response. Someone else arrived and helped me gently pull her out of the car and lay her flat on the asphalt. The rough ground was cold and hard beneath her, but it was the best place to do CPR. I put 2 fingers on her neck, trying to find a pulse again. The first person who tried had said she wasn't sure, so we had to be sure. It was weak, barely there. Then I checked her breathing. There was none. This was real. She was dying. We started CPR, taking turns pushing hard on her chest, feeling her ribs press under our hands, counting out loud to keep the rhythm steady. It was exhausting, scary. My arms burned quickly. I couldn't think about anything else except trying to keep her alive until help arrived. The siren came almost immediately after we started. The ambulance pulled into the lot and paramedics rushed over with their equipment. They took over, continuing the chest compressions with a machine that made a constant thumping sound. The paramedics had a lot of gear and quickly hooked her up to machines to monitor her heart and oxygen levels. One of them told the police officer nearby that they were using naloxone, the drug that can reverse heroin overdoses if given in time. There were more ambulances that arrived, and suddenly there were at least 6 EMTs around her, working quickly but quietly. The police officer said she was probably too far gone, but they would keep trying until they got to the hospital. It was one of those moments where I realized how fragile life is, and how fast it can slip away. What stayed with me the most was the car seat in the back of the vehicle, half hidden under some trash and old blankets. toys scattered on the backseat floor, worn but clearly belonging to a child. The woman had tattoos, 2 names inked on her arms and neck. I thought about who those names might be, probably her kids. It made everything feel even heavier. I stood there, watching the paramedics work, feeling a knot in my throat that wouldn't go away. I had just saved someone's life, or tried to, but it was a woman who was fighting a battle I couldn't see or fix. She was young, probably not much older than me. The needles, the bottles, the faded tattoos, the car seat, they all told a story of pain and struggle. Later, when I was alone, I thought about what I'd seen. How close I'd been to someone's death. How close I'd been to failure. I felt scared and helpless, but also proud I didn't freeze. I did what I could. That experience stayed with me. It changed how I see things. I realized how many people are fighting silent battles every day, some that end in places like that parking lot. It made me want to keep learning, to be ready if it ever happens again. Because life is messy, and sometimes it's just about doing what you can, even if it feels small or hopeless. I think about that woman often. I hope somehow she got help after that. But no matter what, that day taught me the real meaning of CPR. Not just the steps, but the weight of trying to hold someone's life in your hands when everything feels broken. I was delivering a hot tub to this contractor and realtor in a fancy gated community near Branson, Missouri. It was a big job, the kind you don't forget. The house was huge, almost like a mansion, but the way it was built was what made this delivery tricky. The house was set into the side of a hill. The 4th floor was actually at ground level because the house was built into the slope. The driveway met the 4th floor, which was like the main entrance from that side, but the other 3 floors stretched down the hill below it. I arrived early in the morning, the sun just starting to warm the air. The neighborhood was quiet except for the sound of construction workers moving around. The whole area was buzzing with work, trucks, drills, hammers, and the occasional shout of instructions. The contractor's team was busy building out the inside and finishing details outside. They told me the hot tub was going on the 4th floor balcony. I could see the spot from where I was standing, a big open deck overlooking the valley below. They told me I couldn't drive the truck up to the deck, obviously. The hot tub weighed around 900 pounds, so it wasn't something you could just lift. The plan was complicated. I had to build a ramp to get it from the driveway down into the yard, then up another ramp to the porch, through the living room, and out the back patio doors onto the deck. The deck wasn't finished, just enough decking installed, so I could get from the door to the corner where the hot tub would sit. There were no railings, no safety nets, nothing. The drop from that deck was 4 stories down to the ground below. The thought of slipping or falling made my stomach twist, but I had done deliveries like this before and knew what I was doing. The construction workers said they would help. I appreciated it because I knew this wasn't a job I could do alone. We set to work building the ramps, moving the hot tub inch by inch. We slid it out of the truck, onto the dolly, and carefully lowered it onto the first ramp. The ramps were steep and narrow, but the workers helped guide the tub safely. Getting it through the living room was weird. The house was still under construction, with plywood floors and exposed beams. Dust filled the air, and I had to be careful not to knock anything over. The hot tub took up most of the room, and we moved slowly, making sure it didn't bump into walls or door frames. Finally, we got to the patio doors. Opening them wide, I felt a rush of fresh air. Outside, the deck stretched out but was far from finished. The boards were clean, fresh, and smelled like new wood, but large sections were missing. They had only installed enough decking to reach the corner where the tub was supposed to go. Beyond that, it was just open air and a long fall. The contractor was watching. He told me he wanted to leave the hot tub standing on its edge for now, instead of laying it down flat. Normally, you lower it flat to the ground for safety, then move it into place. But he said this was the best way given the deck's shape and the unfinished construction. I didn't like it. Moving the tub standing up is much harder, especially when it's on a narrow, incomplete deck with no railings. I tried to explain that we have to put blocks under one side of the dolly to tilt the tub and pop the straps holding it, so we could pull the dolly out. Then we could tilt the tub back and set down flat. It was the safest way, but the contractor insisted. I had no choice but to go with the plan. I popped one strap free and placed wooden blocks under the dolly. The tub was heavy, 900 pounds, and the deck was barely wide enough to hold it. As I tilted the tub, I could feel my feet come dangerously close to the edge. For inches from where I stood was nothing but empty air. If I slipped, it was a 4-story fall to jagged rocks and dirt below. I stopped and told everyone to freeze. We were close to freeing the dolly, but not quite there. I shifted my feet back a little, trying to find solid ground. The tub leaned more toward me now, its weight pressing down hard. 2 workers stood on each side of me, holding the tub steady. 3 others were working on getting the dolly free from under the tub. One guy fiddled with the strap that was supposed to secure the tub to the house. He looked useless just playing with it, but at least he was trying. Suddenly, one of the workers who was pulling at the dolly got impatient. Without warning, he kicked the corner of the hot tub. The tub shifted instantly, and I lost my balance. I shouted, "I'm falling!" The 2 guys beside me caught some of the tub's weight, but I was already slipping. My arms flailed trying to grab something, anything to stop myself. I was bent backward over the deck's edge, my body arched like a bow. The ground 4 stories below stared back at me. I could see the rough boulders and trees through the gap beneath the deck. My heels slipped over the edge. I was falling. The world slowed down. I felt the cold air rushing past me. My mind screamed with panic. Then, out of nowhere, I felt something catch me. It was the strap. The useless guy who had been messing with it had already hooked one into the house. When I fell backward, the strap caught me under my lower back, arresting my fall. It pulled me forward and slammed me against the bottom of the hot tub, which was still leaning toward me. The dolly finally came free, and the workers pulled the tub upright, holding me tightly against it. I was shaking, breathless, heart pounding like a drum in my chest. That strap had saved my life. I couldn't believe it. One wrong step, one slip, and I would have fallen 4 stories to the ground. I had never been so scared in my life. The feeling of that empty space below me, the weight of the tub pushing against my back, the desperate struggle to stay upright. It was a moment I still replay in my mind. After that, I took a moment to calm down and thank the guy who secured the strap. Without thinking twice, I gave him something I'd been saving for my wife and daughter, a trip to Breckenridge, Colorado for Christmas. It wasn't cheap, but he had earned it. He deserved it more than I did. That day taught me a lot about how quickly things can go wrong and how sometimes the smallest things, the most overlooked people, can save you in the biggest moments. The rest of the delivery went smoothly after that. We finished securing the hot tub on the deck, making sure it wouldn't move in the wind. The house looked like a giant puzzle, half finished and full of sharp edges, but I knew I'd done my part safely. Driving away from the gated community, I kept thinking about how close I had come to falling to my death. That moment standing on the edge of that unfinished deck was the scariest thing I'd ever faced. But thanks to a simple strap and a quick thinking worker, I was still here. That day wasn't just about delivering a hot tub. It was about trust, teamwork, and the fragile line between life and death. Even now, when I think back to that day, I'm grateful. I'm grateful for that strap, for those workers, and for the chance to keep telling this story. Because sometimes the scariest moments are the ones that remind us how precious life really is. When I was about 10 years old, I experienced something I still think about all the time. Even though it's been more than a decade, none of us who were there that night can explain what happened. It wasn't ghosts or monsters or any storybook kind of fear. It was real, and that's what made it so terrifying. It was a Saturday night in early summer, the kind of warm, slow evening where the adults planned their own night out and left the kids behind. That night, all of us cousins and siblings were gathered at my grandparents' house. 10 kids in total, all between the ages of 6 and 16. The older cousins were in charge, but we were mostly just left to our own devices, with the general understanding that if no one broke anything or bled too much, everything would be fine. The house was familiar, big, but lived in. It sat on about an acre of land just outside town, surrounded by a chain link fence and old trees. The backyard was wide open, sloping slightly down toward a brushy area near the fence line. Past that was another house, but you could barely see it through the trees. It was the kind of place that felt safe, especially when it was full of people. That night, it was just us kids, all packed into the living room with bowls of popcorn and the TV playing movies we probably weren't supposed to watch. I remember that the lights were low and the windows were cracked to let in some of the breeze. We were all crowded on the carpet, on the old couch, even leaning against the ottoman and bean bags scattered around. The room smelled like buttered popcorn, soda, and the faint mustiness of old books and carpet. We were midway through a movie, something with monsters or aliens. I don't remember which, when everything changed. It was sudden. No warning, no build-up. First came the flash, bright, white-blue light that lit up the entire living room like someone had turned on a giant camera flash right in our faces. At the same exact moment, the entire house shook. Not like a creak or a little jolt, but a deep, full-body kind of shake. I felt it through my feet, up my legs, and my chest. The windows rattled hard in their frames. The couch actually shifted, and I remember a cup of soda tipping over and spilling on the floor. There was a sound too, not like thunder. It was sharper, louder, like something exploding underground or right outside. It wasn't a car crash or a gunshot. It was something else. We all screamed at the same time. It wasn't the kind of scream that happens in movies, either. It was raw, panicked. I could hear kids crying. Someone shouted. We didn't even have to talk about it. We all just ran. We ended up clumped together in the hallway, the narrow space between the bedrooms. The hallway light was on. It felt safer somehow, closed in. The younger kids were crying. Some of us were just breathing hard, all of us looking around at each other with wide eyes. I remember the heat of all our bodies pressed close, the confusion on everyone's faces. No one wanted to say anything at first, like maybe talking about it would make it worse. The older cousins started trying to calm us down. There was whispering, arguing, but everyone was talking over each other. Someone suggested calling 911. Another said we should wait, that it was probably a transformer blowing or something. But then someone else pointed out that if it was a transformer, why hadn't the power gone out? The lights were still on. The movie had stopped because we turned off ourselves, not because anything went out. Eventually, one of the older cousins called one of the parents. I remember watching them walk toward the kitchen, phone in hand, looking back like they were expecting something to jump out of the shadows. I stayed in the hallway. I didn't want to leave that spot. It felt like the only safe place in the house. After what felt like forever, probably only a few minutes, nothing else had happened. No more sounds, no more shaking. The lights stayed on. The air felt heavy, and we were all jumpy, listening to every creak of the old house settling. After a while, one of the older kids said we should go back to the living room. Not because we weren't scared anymore, but because we wanted to see if anything outside looked different. We didn't go empty-handed. Someone grabbed a wooden broomstick. Another kid took a kitchen knife, holding it like they had seen in movies. Someone else picked up a baseball bat. I had nothing, but I stayed close to the kid with the bat. We moved slow, like we thought something might still be waiting. I remember feeling like I was walking through molasses. My legs didn't want to move, and every noise made me flinch. The living room looked the same. The TV screen was paused. The spilled soda was soaking into the carpet. Nothing broken, nothing out of place. The front door was still locked, and when we looked out the windows, we didn't see anything. That made it worse somehow, the fact that everything was just normal. Eventually, we worked our way to the back door. It had a window in the top half, and someone pulled the curtain aside. We all gathered around, peering through the glass. The backyard was dark, lit only by the distant glow of the porch light. The trees beyond the fence were still. No smoke, no fire, no holes in the ground. No signs of a lightning strike or anything else that might explain what we felt. We opened the back door. Slowly, carefully, a couple of us stepped out onto the porch, flashlights in hand. The air outside felt weird, still and quiet, heavier than usual. We walked the yard slowly, scanning the ground. I remember stepping carefully, like I expected something to jump out of the grass. But there was nothing. No burn marks, no broken branches, no sign of anything hitting the ground or exploding. No smell of gas or scorched earth, just grass, bushes, and the same old fence. We stayed out there for about 10 minutes, then came back inside and locked the door. None of us said it, but we were all disappointed that we didn't find anything. We wanted there to be something, some kind of proof, because what we had felt wasn't normal. It wasn't just a shared panic. We all experienced the same flash, the same rumble. That kind of thing doesn't just happen for no reason. The rest of the night, we stuck together. No one wanted to be alone. We turned the TV back on, but no one really watched. We just wanted some kind of noise in the background, something to fill the space and distract us. A few of the younger kids fell asleep eventually, but I didn't. I stayed awake, listening. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind made me sit up straight. I was waiting for something else to happen. Around midnight, the parents came home. I remember how their car headlights swept across the yard as they pulled into the driveway. When they walked in, laughing and talking, the mood changed immediately. We all rushed to them, talking over each other, trying to explain what happened. I could see their faces change as they realized how serious we were. But at the same time, they didn't look convinced. They checked the backyard with flashlights, looked over the house. Nothing. No neighbors came over to say they heard or saw anything. No reports of explosions or transformer failures in the neighborhood. The power hadn't gone out. There was no wind, no storm. Nothing on the news, nothing from the local power company. As far as anyone outside that house was concerned, nothing had happened. But we knew better. The next morning, we looked again in daylight. Still nothing. The backyard looked exactly the same. I checked every inch of it with one of my cousins, looking for scorch marks, holes, anything. We even climbed the fence and walked the tree line, but there was nothing. Not a single trace. It was like whatever had happened had left no mark at all. For a while after that, people tried to explain it. Some said maybe a nearby transformer had blown and we just couldn't see the damage. Others said maybe it was a sonic boom or a weird atmospheric thing. But those explanations didn't hold up. We felt the house shake, we saw the flash, and we heard the sound. If it was something like that, other people would have noticed. There would have been reports, but there weren't. The scariest part wasn't the noise or the shaking. It was the fact that there was no answer. That's what stuck with me. Something happened that night, and no one could explain it. Not the adults, not the neighbors, not the internet. We were 10 kids who all experienced the same thing at the same time, and somehow the world just kept going like nothing had happened. Years went by. We all got older. Every once in a while, when we're all together again, someone will bring it up. We'll talk about where we were sitting, how it felt, what we thought it might have been. The details haven't faded. They're sharp and clear, burned into our memories. No one's ever come up with a better explanation. We all still agree it was the scariest thing we've ever experienced. I've had other moments since then that made me jump, made me nervous, but nothing has ever hit like that night did. Nothing's ever left me with that same feeling of something happening that wasn't supposed to. I still think about it sometimes when I'm lying in bed at night, staring at the ceiling. I wonder what it really was. A gas explosion underground? A freak lightning bolt with no thunder or fire? Some kind of military test? Who knows? All I know is 10 of us were there. We all saw the light, heard the sound, and felt the shake. And then nothing. Just silence in a backyard that looked the same as always. No ghosts, no creatures, no tricks. Just a moment where something real and terrifying happened, and the world never gave us an answer. So this happened to me last summer when I went back to stay with my parents for a couple weeks during the holidays. I don't usually go back much anymore since moving out, but I figured it had been a while and my folks were always happy to have me home, especially my mom. It was nice to get away from the city noise, the constant work emails, and just relax in the house I grew up in. The house is in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town, just trees, quiet streets, and a lot of space between houses. You know the kind, old carpet, creaky floors, and bedrooms that still have the same paint color from when you were a kid. It was a normal night. I stayed up late in my old room, which hadn't changed much. Same desk, same old posters, even the same lamp with a cracked base I never bothered to fix. I had my laptop open, watching videos, browsing random stuff, and just enjoying the quiet. It must have been close to 3 a.m. Everyone else was asleep. My parents had gone to bed around 11, and my younger sister, who's a couple years younger than me, said goodnight sometime around midnight. Her room was down the hall from mine, maybe 10 or 12 steps away. So I'm sitting there, low brightness on the screen, earphones in, but only one earbud in, and I see my phone light up on the desk. It's a call from my sister. That immediately struck me as odd. It was 3 in the morning, and if she needed anything, she could have just walked over to my room. Her room's maybe 20 feet away. It would have taken less time to get out of bed and knock than to find her phone and call me. I pulled the earbud out, picked up the phone, but just as I was about to answer, the call ended. No sound, no voice, just a missed call now sitting on my screen. I stared at it for a second. The call had lasted exactly 1 second. That's what it said. Call duration, 0:01. I figured maybe she called by accident, like she rolled over on her phone or something. But even that didn't feel right. The timing felt too weird. Something about it made me uneasy. Maybe it was just the time of night, maybe just my brain playing tricks, but something didn't sit right. I decided to get up and check on her. I left my room quietly, didn't turn on the hallway light, just let the dim glow from the bathroom night light guide me. I reached her door, which was closed but not locked. As soon as I reached for the knob, I heard her scream. A loud, panic scream, like she was genuinely terrified. Not a nightmare scream. This was sharp, fast, real. I pushed the door open hard and stepped in. She was sitting upright in her bed, blanket clutched up to her chest, tears in her eyes, shaking. I looked around immediately. Her room was dark but familiar. The closet door was shut, the window was closed, blinds halfway down, a small desk lamp in the corner was still on, casting a dull yellow light over part of the room. I scanned every corner, under the bed, behind the door, in the closet. Nobody there. The air felt still, heavy, almost like the moment after a thunderclap when everything is dead quiet. She eventually calmed down, wiped her face, and explained what happened. She said she woke up and saw a dark figure, like a shadow, but solid, standing right next to her bed, just inches from her face. She didn't recognize it, didn't see a face, just this black shape standing too close. That's when she screamed. She said the second she did, it was gone. Here's where it got even stranger. I told her she had called me just a minute earlier. Her face went blank. She said that wasn't possible. She hadn't touched her phone. In fact, she didn't even know where her phone was. She thought it was in her bag downstairs. So I went to check, just to be sure. I walked down to the living room, and there it was, sitting in her purse on the side table near the couch. I brought it up to her. It was locked, battery about 70%. She unlocked it, opened her call log, and nothing. No outgoing call to me, not even in the deleted or recent list. It was like it had never happened, but I had the record on my phone. One missed call from her, time-stamped at 3:04 a.m. 1 second long. Now I'm not a paranoid person. I don't jump to ghosts or supernatural stuff. I've had my share of weird things happen, but I always try to find the logic in it. So I started running through explanations. Could someone else have used her phone to call me? No. The doors were all locked. No signs of forced entry. We checked everything, windows, screens, basement door, garage. Nothing disturbed. Every lock was in place, even the ones with those stiff, old deadbolts that take effort to turn. Could have been some kind of glitch, like a delayed call, or some kind of system error. Maybe. But how did it come from her number at the exact moment she saw something in her room? And if her phone was downstairs, untouched, how did it make that call? Phones don't just decide to call people by themselves, especially not locked in someone's bag. That night, we didn't sleep. I stayed in her room with her, sitting on the chair by her desk, watching the door just in case. She eventually drifted off sometime around 6 a.m., but I couldn't. I just sat there, thinking, running through everything. The scream, the shadow, the phone call. Nothing lined up. In the morning, we told our parents. They were concerned, of course, but they wrote it off as a nightmare. My mom especially, she thought my sister probably had a vivid dream and screamed, and the rest was us reading too much into it. I didn't argue, but I knew what I saw. I knew that call happened. I showed them the log on my phone. They shrugged, said maybe it was a butt dial, maybe the phone glitched. My sister swore she didn't touch it, and I believe her. A few days passed. Things felt normal again, at least on the surface. But my sister was clearly shaken. She didn't like being alone in her room. She started sleeping with the light on. I started leaving my door open at night, just in case. We didn't talk much about it after that. It was like this unspoken thing. Something we knew was strange, but there was no way to explain it. So we let it sit in the back of our minds, untouched. But the part that still sticks with me the most, even now, is the timing. That call came in at the exact same moment she saw whatever that was in her room. A second earlier or later, and maybe I wouldn't have gotten up. Maybe she wouldn't have screamed in time. I don't know. But it was too precise to be coincidence. I did a bit of digging later. Checked if there were any kinds of known bugs where phones call on their own. Found a few weird cases, pocket dials, malfunctions from certain apps, but nothing that matched this. No explanation for a locked phone in a bag, calling someone at the exact moment something scared the hell out of its owner upstairs. Eventually, I went back to the city, back to work, back to life. But every time I visit now, I look at her room differently. There's nothing visibly wrong with it. Same posters, same bed, same furniture. But there's a feeling in there now, like the air never fully settled. Like something got disturbed and never really went back to sleep. We still talk about it sometimes, just the two of us. Usually late at night, when the house is quiet and the lights are low. She still doesn't know what she saw. She still doesn't understand how the call happened. Neither do I. And I guess the part that really gets under my skin is not what happened, but what didn't. There were no signs, no break-in, no proof of anyone. Nothing was stolen, no threats, no follow-up. Just a 1-second call and a dark shape that disappeared. Whatever it was, it didn't need to leave evidence. It didn't need to break locks or move objects. It just needed a moment. 1 second, just enough to remind us that sometimes things don't need to make sense to be real. And maybe that's the scariest part. I was 17 when I first got my license. That feeling of freedom is something I still remember like it was yesterday. No more waiting on rides, or hitching with friends, or taking the bus. That first summer with my license, I barely spent any time at home. I was always driving, aimlessly, mostly just trying to feel older than I was. I'd drive after work, after school, after dinner, just anywhere the road stretched out in front of me. Gas was cheaper back then, and my parents didn't ask too many questions. I had my job, paid for my own tank, and stayed out of trouble. At least trouble they knew about. Back in high school, me and my group of friends had this mission, if you could call it that. We were always looking for abandoned places. Houses, buildings, warehouses, whatever. Places to explore, party in, or just hang out and take dumb pictures for the internet. We had this short list going. A rundown house behind the old quarry. A half-burnt mobile home at the edge of town. An old barn with half the roof caved in. But the crown jewel, the one I always thought about, was this unfinished house I passed by almost every day on my way home from work. I worked evenings at a pizza shop, and the drive home took me through some of the more wooded parts of town, just before the suburbs thinned out into farmland and scattered construction projects. The house was massive. It looked like someone had big dreams and ran out of money halfway through building them. It sat far back from the road, surrounded by weeds and tall grass. No windows, no doors, just a shell of a mansion. There were still construction materials in the back, wrapped in plastic that had turned yellow in the sun. The driveway was gravel, half of it washed away into the ditch beside it. I must have driven by that place 100 times before I ever stopped. It just sat there, untouched. Nobody around, no signs, no fences, no trespassing warnings, just a skeleton of a house waiting for someone to come inside. One night, I was talking to my friend Ryan before we met up to catch a movie. I mentioned the house to him, the big empty one out on that long stretch of road past the gas station. He said we should check it out. I've been wanting to, but I guess I needed the nudge. So before the movie, we took my car and drove out there. It was late summer, just after sunset. That time of night where it's not quite dark yet, but the headlights need to be on. The bugs were out in force, bouncing off the windshield as I turned off the main road and into the gravel driveway. It crunched under the tires as we rolled up toward the front of the house. I left the engine running and the lights on. The place looked even bigger up close. It was like a haunted mansion, but without the history, just silence and emptiness. We sat there, not even 10 seconds, just looking. I didn't even pull all the way in. I just sort of crept forward enough for us to get a full view of the front. Then just as fast as we got there, I shifted into reverse and backed out. I had this feeling I couldn't shake. Not fear, exactly, just a weird sort of pressure in my chest. Like we were being watched, or like we'd stumbled somewhere we weren't supposed to be. I reversed back down the driveway and turned onto the road again, heading back toward the highway that would take us to the theater. Not even a minute later, Ryan shifted in his seat and said, "You see that?" I looked in the rearview mirror, and there it was. A big pickup truck, one of those heavy-duty F-250 types with big tires and a lift kit. It came out of nowhere, headlights blazing. High beams on. Close, way too close. Practically right in my bumper. My first thought was that it was just a coincidence, but something about the way it came up behind us didn't sit right. It didn't pull out from a driveway or merge from a side road. It was just there all of a sudden, and it wasn't letting up. I tapped the brakes a little, a trick my dad taught me to get tailgaters to back off. The truck didn't budge, just kept right on me like it was glued to the back of my car. I told myself maybe it was someone in a hurry, someone trying to get around me. So I kept driving, sticking close to the speed limit, hoping they'd pass. But they didn't. They stayed there, pressing me forward with those blinding beams. We reached the light at the corner where the gas station sat. I signaled right like normal. The truck didn't follow me through the light. Instead, it gunned it across the gas station parking lot, cutting diagonally across to the next intersection and pulling right in front of me. Slid into position sideways, blocking the lane completely. It was so sudden, I had to slam on my brakes. My tires skidded, and my heart jumped into my throat. The truck stopped. Driver's door swung open. Out stepped a man. Big guy, built like someone who lifted heavy things for fun. He was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up, arms thick and tanned. He walked with a purpose, slow but direct, like he wasn't worried about us driving off. Ryan muttered something under his breath, but I didn't hear it. My focus was on the man. He came right up to the driver's side window and knocked hard. Not angry, not friendly, just deliberate. I cracked the window a couple inches. The guy leaned in, face lit up by the dashboard. His eyes were dark, sharp, but his expression didn't match his size. He wasn't yelling or angry, just studying us. He looked at me, then at Ryan, then back at me. Then he said something, but I could barely hear it over the sound of my heart beating in my ears. I managed to mumble something about making a U-turn, hoping it sounded believable. He stared for another second, maybe longer, then he smiled. A tight, controlled kind of smile. He nodded, stepped back, and walked back to his truck. He didn't rush. No threat, no hurry. Like he had all the time in the world. He got in, fired the engine, and slowly pulled out onto the road, disappearing down the highway. Just like that. I sat there for a second, my hands shaking on the wheel. Ryan was completely silent. The weirdest part, and I mean this with every bit of honesty I have in me, was how empty the road had become. That gas station was usually packed. Even at dusk, it had cars filling up, people walking around, lights on in the shop. But in that moment, it was like we were alone in a dead zone. Like the world had paused long enough for this guy to do whatever he was planning to do. And then it resumed again like nothing happened. We didn't go to the movie. We drove home in silence. I think we both needed time to process what just happened. I dropped Ryan off and drove straight to my house, parked in the driveway, and sat in the car for a while. Just sat there with the engine off and the keys in my lap. I could still see his face in my mind. Not angry, not happy. Just calculating. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell anyone else for a long time. It felt stupid, like maybe we were just kids overreacting to some guy who thought we were up to no good. But it didn't feel like that at the time. It didn't feel like someone protecting their property or curious about strangers. It felt like we stumbled into something we weren't meant to see. A couple weeks later, I drove by the house again. Daylight this time, and I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Off to the side, where the tall grass gave way to a dirt clearing, there were tire tracks, fresh ones, leading out toward the back. Like a vehicle had been driving in and out recently. But the construction had stopped years ago. No workers, no equipment, Nothing being built. I got this feeling in my stomach again. That same pressure I felt the night we pulled in. I didn't stop the car. I just drove right past. Over the years, I've passed that house again and again. And it's never changed. Still empty. Still unfinished. Like it's frozen in time. And still, no one around it. No new signs. No for sale listings. No crews. But every once in a while, you see a truck in the distance. Parked far back on the property. Big, dark pickup like the one that blocked us off that night. I don't know for sure what's going on there. Could be nothing. But the way that man looked at us, the way he moved, the way the truck showed up out of nowhere, I've never forgotten it. I've seen drug operations before, known people who got into bad things in quiet places like that. It fits if you think about it. Big empty house, off the main road, no neighbors, easy access. No one would think twice if something shady was going on there. They'd just assume it was abandoned. All I know is we got lucky that night. Whatever that man was about to do, he decided not to. Maybe we didn't seem like a threat. Maybe he bought the lie. Or maybe he just didn't feel like getting his hands dirty. But that pause, that hesitation before he smiled, it still makes my skin crawl. We were inches from something real and dangerous, and we didn't even realize it until it was too late. That was the last time I ever went looking for abandoned places to party in. After that, I stuck to parking lots and basements like everyone else. Because that kind of thrill, the real kind, the one that grabs you by the throat and makes you see just how small and unprepared you are, that's not fun. That's a lesson. And that house, it's still there. If you drive just past the gas station and keep your eyes left after the bend, you'll see it through the trees. A dark, hollow shell with secrets inside. I've never stopped there again. I don't plan to. My house sits farther back in the lot than the others on my street. Most homes are built close to the sidewalk with short driveways and small front yards. But mine's tucked deep into the property, like it was trying to hide from the road. You'd barely notice it driving past, especially at night. There's a long sidewalk that stretches from the street all the way to my front porch. It runs along the entire length of the living room wall, which is made up of 3 massive, fixed-pane windows. They don't open. They just sit there, letting in all the daylight and, at night, whatever stares might be watching from the dark. I never liked those windows. They make you feel like you're on display, like a bug under glass. When my parents and younger brother went out of town for a week-long vacation, I didn't bother going. I told them I had work and didn't want to take time off, which was partly true. The real reason was I liked the idea of having the house to myself. I hadn't lived completely alone before, and I thought it would be fun to have some peace and quiet. No one leaving dishes in the sink. No yelling from my brother's Xbox games. No small talk at the dinner table. Just silence. Freedom. The first night, I cracked a couple beers and threw on a movie. It felt nice, not having to check the time or listen for anyone coming in. I polished off the 6-pack and chased it with a few shots of bourbon we had stashed above the fridge. After that, I wasn't thinking much about anything. I laid down on the couch, the one that sat right under those huge windows, and passed out sometime around 9. When I woke up, it was still dark and the room was cold. Not just cool cold, the kind of cold that makes the hairs on your arms stand up and your teeth ache. My mouth was dry. My head throbbed a bit from the mix of alcohol, but something else had stirred me awake. I didn't hear anything right away, just that deep, muffled silence that sometimes falls over the house at night. Then I realized I was holding my breath. I opened my eyes slowly, not moving, just shifting them upward. The windows above me loomed like black mirrors, reflecting the dim light from the kitchen night light in the hallway behind me. And then a sound, a dull thud, not loud, but heavy. It came from right above me. I didn't flinch, didn't move a muscle. I just kept my eyes on the window. Another thud, louder this time. Then 3 quick bangs like someone slamming their open palm against the glass. I saw the shadow first, just the outline of the head and shoulders, vague, but unmistakably human. The shape was hunched, like they were leaning in to get a better look. I still didn't move. My body felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. My mind raced through 100 possibilities. Maybe it was a neighbor, maybe someone lost, but none of them made sense. I turned my head just enough to see the cable box under the TV. The red digital numbers read 3:04 a.m. The pounding continued, steady now, not frantic but insistent. Like whoever was out there knew I was inside, knew I was awake. It wasn't loud enough to wake neighbors, but loud enough to keep me frozen in place. Then it stopped, just like that. Nothing. I listened, straining my ears. All I could hear was the faint hum of the fridge and my own shallow breathing. I stayed like that, stiff on the couch, hoping they had walked away, hoping it was over. Maybe a drunk who'd stumbled off the sidewalk and didn't realize this wasn't their house. Maybe they'd figured it out and left. Then it started again, but now from two places at once. The window above me erupted with banging again, hard enough that I could hear the glass vibrating in the frame. At the same time, the front door, just a few feet to the left, shuddered under a series of heavy blows. The door is solid wood with a metal frame, old but strong. I felt each knock echo through the floor. It was unmistakable. There were two people, one at the window and one at the door. My chest tightened. I didn't have any weapons nearby. The kitchen was only about 10 feet away, but to get there I'd have to stand up. I'd have to be seen. I'd have to make noise. So I just laid there, heart pounding so hard it hurt, trying to decide what the hell to do. I thought about calling the police, but my phone was charging on the kitchen counter. Again, I'd have to get up. I thought about running to the back door, but it creaks loudly and it would take too long to unlock. Plus, if they were at the front, what if someone else was in the back? What if they were already inside? The banging kept going. Not a frenzy, but a rhythm. Like they were trying to wear me down. Like they wanted me to move. I felt completely exposed under that glass. All it would take was a brick or a boot, and they'd be through. But they didn't break it. They just kept knocking. I counted in my head. 5 seconds. 10. 20, 40 minutes. It felt like a lifetime. I laid there in complete terror, eyes open, barely blinking, listening to the assault on the house continue. And then, nothing. Silence. The moment the noise stopped, I thought it was a trick, that they were waiting for me to make a move. But as the minutes passed and the quiet stayed, I started to believe they were gone. I didn't get up. I couldn't. My muscles had locked up from lying so still, and my mind was still flooded with adrenaline. I stayed frozen until the sky outside started to shift from black to pale gray. Morning was coming. When the sun finally broke over the trees and light filled the living room, I sat up. My legs were numb. My back was sore, but I didn't care. I crawled to the kitchen on my hands and knees and grabbed my phone. No messages, no missed calls. I wanted to call someone, anyone, but I didn't know what I'd say. I didn't even know if they'd believe me. I peeked out the front door window. The porch was empty. I opened the door slowly and stepped outside. The sidewalk was undisturbed. The dew on the grass was untouched. No footprints. No signs of anything. I walked over to the windows. Nothing broken. No cracks. Just a faint smear like a palm print, right in the middle of the center pane. I stared at it for a long time. The rest of the day, I didn't do anything. I didn't shower. I didn't eat. I just stayed inside with all the doors locked and the curtains drawn, watching the windows. Every little noise made me jump. A car door slamming outside made me flinch. The creak of the house settling made my stomach twist. That night, I didn't sleep. I left every light on in the house. I took a kitchen knife and sat in the hallway, out of sight from any windows, just waiting. But nothing happened. The night passed quietly. The next day, I called a friend. I didn't want to be alone. He asked what was going on, and I tried to explain. But the more I talked, the more I realized how crazy it sounded. Two people knocking on your house for 40 minutes in the middle of the night, and then disappearing without a trace. No break-in, no damage, no stolen property, just knocking. He made a joke about not wanting to get murdered in his sleep, but I didn't laugh. I didn't have it in me. I didn't sleep in the living room again after that. For the rest of the week, I barricaded myself in my bedroom. I pushed my dresser in front of the door. I kept my phone under my pillow and a knife within arm's reach. Every night, I'd lie there in the dark, straining to hear any noise from the front of the house. The knocking never came back. Not that week, not ever. Eventually, my family came home, and life went back to normal. Sort of. I didn't tell them what happened. I didn't see the point. What could they do? What could anyone do? But something changed in me. That sense of safety I'd always taken for granted in my own home. It was gone. I started noticing how far back the house really sat from the street, how long the sidewalk stretched, how those windows turned my living room into a fishbowl. I bought blackout curtains and put them up the next day. I started locking the bedroom door at night. I got a bat and kept it beside the couch. I don't drink much anymore. Not when I'm alone, at least. That night made me realize how vulnerable I really was, how quickly things can go from quiet and normal to terrifying and unexplainable. And the worst part is I still don't know who it was. I don't know why they came, what they wanted, or why they didn't just break in. The not knowing is what eats at me the most. Because every so often, when I'm walking up the sidewalk at night and I see those windows glowing from the inside, I wonder if someone else is standing out there in the dark, watching, just waiting. When I was a kid, weekends meant freedom. My parents were the kind of people who understood that children needed room to grow, to explore, to feel trusted. I always felt safe with them. I think that's part of what makes this memory stick the way it does. It starts with a feeling of comfort, of normalcy. On Friday and Saturday nights, instead of being sent to bed at my usual time, I got to sleep on the couch in the living room. The rule was simple. My sister was a light sleeper and needed her rest, so if I want to stay up late watching TV, I had to camp out downstairs. That was fine with me. I had blankets, the glow of the television, the smell of the leather couch that had absorbed years of family life. I always felt like I had my own little world down there. Most nights I'd pass out to whatever was on Nick at night, the screen gently flickering as I drifted off. I'd wake up tangled in blankets with the first light of morning shining in through the windows. One night, though, something woke me up. Not a sound, not anything I could describe clearly. It was a feeling, a prickly, tingling feeling that started at the back of my neck and spread across my shoulders. Like static, but under my skin. I sat up too fast, still half asleep but instantly alert. My eyes locked on the front window. I don't know why I looked there first. Maybe I already knew. The moon was high and bright enough that you didn't need a flashlight outside. We lived out in rural Georgia, way out where the stars were so clear it made you dizzy to stare up too long. Our front yard sloped down a bit, scattered with a few large trees before the forest thickened up behind the mailbox. The trees were huge, old oaks, maybe older than the house itself. They creaked in the wind, groaned sometimes. I'd grown up hearing those noises and never thought twice about them. But this time, in that pale moonlight, I saw something that didn't make sense. Something that wasn't a branch or a shadow. A silhouette in the tree. Not just near it, asterisk and asterisk it. Perched or crouched or something. I couldn't make out the details, just the shape of a person sitting there like they belonged in the tree. Perfectly still. I froze. Everything in my body screamed that it was wrong. The dog, our old golden retriever named Harley, sprinted across the room and slammed into the window, barking and snarling like he'd lost his mind. He wasn't a loud dog, not usually. That bark was different. Sharp, angry, protective. I'd never heard him like that before. Not even when a raccoon once got into the trash. I didn't stay in the living room. I bolted, tripping over my own feet as I ran down the hall to my parents' bedroom. I didn't knock. I pushed the door open and stumbled in, heart thudding, trying to explain what I'd seen. My words were a mess, all jumbled and fast, but something in my voice must have told my dad this wasn't just a dream or a kid's imagination. He grabbed something from beside his bed, maybe a bat, maybe a crowbar, I don't remember, and rushed out with Harley trailing close behind. I stayed in the room with my mom. She pulled me in her lap and held me, her arms wrapped tight around me like she was trying to shield me from the world. I didn't cry, not yet. I just stared at the doorway, listening. Dad was out there for a while. I heard Harley barking again, further away now outside. Eventually, Dad came back in. He looked serious but calm, said he didn't see anyone, said the yard was empty. Maybe I dreamed it, maybe it was nothing, but I knew what I saw. I didn't want to sleep in the living room anymore. That little world that used to feel safe suddenly felt too open, too exposed. So I went back to my bedroom. My sister was already asleep when I crept in and laid down in my bed. I whispered what happened, told her about the man in the tree. She mumbled something but didn't really wake up. I don't think she believed me, even though Dad said it was nothing. He kept moving around the house. I could hear his footsteps, the creak of floorboards. Once in a while, I saw him pass by the hallway with a mug of coffee in his hand. He looked tired but alert, like he was going to keep checking things until morning came. That helped a little, knowing he was awake. I pulled the blanket up to my chin and stared out my bedroom window. It faced the side yard, with a fence ran along the edge of our property. Beyond the fence was more forest, the kind of woods that got so dark at night they looked like a wall. My window was cracked open a little. It was a warm night, and we didn't always use the AC, just let the breeze cool the rooms. The moonlight came through that window, just enough to cast soft shadows across the floor. I kept watching the window, hoping to see nothing. Just darkness, just trees. But then I saw movement. Not in the shadows, not in my head. A figure, a person, right there outside my window, close enough that if the screen wasn't there, I could have reached out and touched him. My heart stopped. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The man was just standing there, watching me. The moonlight hit just right. I could see his face, not in detail, but I could tell he was staring straight at me. And then he lifted his hand, slowly, brought a finger to his lips. He gave me the shush signal. And just like that, he turned and ran. Not stumbled, not disappeared. He just turned around and ran straight back into the woods. Not in a panic, more like he was done and didn't want to be seen anymore. Like he made his point. I lost it. The fear hit me like a wave and all I could do was cry. Not loud sobs. I didn't want to wake up my sister. I just curled up in bed and cried so hard I couldn't catch my breath. I must have cried for hours. My whole body shook. I kept seeing his face, that finger, that signal. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a monster. It was a person, a real person. I didn't sleep again that night. Eventually, sometime after the first bird started chirping, Dad poked his head in to check on us. I think he could tell something was wrong, but I didn't say anything. I didn't want him to think I was making it up. I just told him I was scared and left it at that. Later that day, he went outside and looked around again. He didn't find anything unusual. No footprints, no broken branches. Nothing to prove someone had been there. But I know what I saw. I was awake. I wasn't dreaming. After that, I never slept in the living room again. Not even during the day. I didn't feel safe there. I'd sit on the couch, sure, but I wouldn't fall asleep. Not with that window staring back at me like a watching eye. My parents tried to reassure me. They started locking all the windows at night. Dad added motion sensor lights to the corners of the house. The dog stayed indoors at night more often, but it didn't matter. I'd lie in bed, listening for footsteps, watching the window even after the blinds were closed. That night changed me. It's been years since then. I'm older now. I've seen a lot, dealt with more adult fears, money, work, real life problems. But that night still lives in the back of my head. It never left. The worst part was knowing someone chose to be out there. Chose to climb a tree and stare a child through a window. Then chose to come back later just to let me know that they were real, that they were watching, that they knew where I slept. I think about that shush motion a lot. It wasn't angry. It wasn't even threatening, not in the way a raised fist or a weapon might be. It was quiet, controlled. That's what made it worse. He wanted me to know he was in control, that he could come back if he wanted, that he didn't need to say anything. Just that one gesture was enough. He never came back, as far as I know. Or if he did, I never saw him again. But I stayed scared for a long time. I started closing all my windows, pulling the blinds tight, even in the middle of the day. I started double-checking locks, walking a little faster when I had to go out to the shed after dark. My childhood changed after that. That sense of easy comfort, of trusting the dark not to hold anything dangerous, it vanished. Eventually, I told my parents everything. Years later, I don't think they knew how to react. My mom got real quiet. My dad looked angry, but the kind of angry where you're helpless to do anything about it. I think it haunted him too, knowing something happened right under his roof, and he couldn't stop it, couldn't even prove it. I sometimes wonder what that man wanted, why he chose our house, why he didn't try to break in or talk or do anything beyond watching. Maybe that was enough for him. Maybe that's all he wanted, to be seen, to scare. Or maybe he just liked knowing a kid was afraid to go to sleep ever again. It took me years to sleep with the blinds open. I still don't sleep near windows if I can help it. Even now, if I hear a noise outside at night, that old fear crawls back into my chest. Not panic, just a deep, cold alertness. The kind that makes you sit up and stare into the dark, wondering if someone's staring back. I don't tell this story much, not because I'm afraid people won't believe me, but because it doesn't need embellishment. There's nothing supernatural about it. No twist ending, no ghost or demon. Just a man in a tree, a man at my window, a man who, for one night, decided to make a kid feel completely and utterly helpless. And it worked. About 2 years ago, I was driving home from a family reunion. It was late, well past midnight by the time I hit the road, and the drive back was supposed to take about 2 hours. I didn't stay overnight because I had to be at work early the next morning, so I packed up, said my goodbyes, and started heading back. The route I took was mostly on these narrow roads lined with dense bushes and thick trees on both sides. You know the kind, the type you see in movies where everything looks dark and closed in, the branches hanging low like they're trying to reach out for you. I had been driving for around 45 minutes when the tiredness hit me like a brick wall. Not the usual kind of tired where you just feel a little sleepy. You know when your whole body just feels heavy and your eyelids want to close no matter what? That kind of sudden, overwhelming tiredness. I knew I couldn't keep going much longer, but the problem was I didn't see a single place where I could safely stop. No rest areas, no gas stations, no parking lots, just endless stretches of road with thick forest on both sides. I kept my eyes open, hoping to spot a place, but nothing came up. The roads weren't empty, though. I'd pass a car every few minutes or so, and it was mostly the kind of late night traffic that makes you want to push on and just get home. But my body was screaming at me to stop. Eventually, I did something I knew wasn't the smartest move. I pulled over to the side of the road. Not on pavement, but onto the grass, just past the shoulder, behind a bunch of bushes that I thought might hide my car from anyone passing by. I was so tired, I barely even cared about where I was. I glanced at the clock when I shut off the engine, 11:22. I leaned back in my seat, locked the doors, and let my eyes close. The darkness inside the car felt safe, like a little bubble away from the cold night air outside. The trees and bushes made the world seem quieter, though the road still had that occasional passing car every few minutes. Sometime later, I woke up with a start. At first, I wasn't sure why. I was half dazed, still wrapped in the fog of sleep, but then I heard it. A scratching sound. It was soft at first, like something brushing against the side of the car. I blinked and looked at the clock. It was 11:50. I listened carefully. The scratching stopped after a few seconds. I told myself it was probably just a raccoon or some kind of small animal checking out the car. I was still so tired that I didn't want to move or open the door or even look outside. So I just shut my eyes again and drifted back to sleep. But then almost an hour later, I woke up again. This time, the scratching was louder and it didn't stop. It kept going like something was really trying to get at the car. My heart started pounding. I stayed as still as I could, trying to convince myself it was just an animal. But why would it come back after nearly an hour? The thought nagged at me. I reached out slowly and grabbed my phone, but the battery was almost dead and there was no signal anyway. I didn't want to get out of the car, but I needed to see what was happening. I carefully turned my head and looked into the rearview mirror. For a moment, all I saw was darkness and the vague shape of bushes. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught movement, something darting away from the car into the trees. It was quick, just a shadow running off into the forest. That's when my mind went somewhere dark. I thought about all those stories you hear about people stopped on the side of the road, scratching sounds on their cars, or worse. Like that old tale about the hook-handed killer who scratches on the car and waits for the driver to get out. I wasn't about to stick around and find out if that was real or not. I slammed my foot on the gas and pulled back onto the road. No more than 100 yards ahead was a sharp bend in the road. As I came around it, I saw a car parked on the side, driver's door wide open, like someone had just left it there in a hurry. I slowed down and glanced over, looking to see if anyone was inside, but the seat was empty. My heart was racing now, the hair on my arms standing up. I checked my rearview mirror, ready to see if the thing from before was following me. There was nothing, just the dark road stretching behind me. Then, suddenly, a man came sprinting around the bend. He was yelling at me, shouting something I couldn't make out at first, but the tone was sharp and urgent. My instincts kicked in. Without thinking twice, I hit the accelerator and sped past him. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. I just drove as fast as I could until I was miles away, where the trees finally thinned out and the lights from a small town started to glow on the horizon. I never saw that man again, and I never went back to that stretch of road at night. The whole thing still haunts me, especially because I was so close to becoming a sitting target on the side of that road. The silence, the scratching, the empty car with the door wide open. It all felt like a warning I ignored. From then on, I made sure never to stop and sleep anywhere that felt even a little bit off, no matter how tired I was. It's easy to think you're safe in your car, behind locked doors, but sometimes that feeling of safety is just an illusion. Out there, on those dark roads where the trees block the moonlight and every shadow looks like it's moving, you're not as alone as you want to believe. You don't want to find out what's lurking just beyond the bushes. So yeah, if you're ever driving late and your body screams at you to rest, don't pull over somewhere you don't know. Don't try to hide your car behind bushes hoping no one will see you. It's better to keep going even if you're tired, or find a well-lit, busy place to stop. Because sometimes the thing you don't see scratching at your car is worse than anything you could imagine. That night taught me that lesson the hard way. And trust me, it's a lesson I won't forget. I don't usually sleep in the living room. I'm the kind of person who likes routine, my own bed, doors closed, lights off, phone charging nearby. But that night, I'd passed out on the couch. I remember it wasn't anything special, no big story behind it. I just stayed up late watching some mindless show, scrolling through my phone, too tired to get up and walk to my bedroom. I had a blanket over me, one I usually kept folded up on the back of the couch, and my cat, Bella, was curled up on the floor nearby, half asleep. It was probably around 2:30 in the morning when it happened. I didn't check the time, but I remember the quiet, that middle of the night stillness where everything feels heavier. I went from dead asleep to wide awake instantly. Not groggy, not confused, just suddenly alert. Eyes open, no dream, no noise, just awake. The first thing I noticed was how quiet the room was. No ticking from the wall clock, no humming from the fridge down the hallway, no cars outside. It was like everything had stopped. And then I heard Bella. She wasn't meowing or moving around. She was growling. Low, slow, like the sound a cat makes when it's cornered. A sound you don't hear often, and when you do, it cuts right through you. I turned my head toward her, and she was standing now, not curled up anymore. Her body stiff, tail low, the fur along her spine puffed up. She was staring across the room, past the TV, toward the far corner. I followed her gaze. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought maybe my eyes were still adjusting. There was no light on in the living room, except a small plug-in nightlight near the hallway, and even that was faint. But there, in that far corner, standing where there should have been nothing, was a shape. Not a pile of laundry, not a coat hanging off a chair. It wasn't anything I recognized. It was tall, probably around 6 feet. Still, blacker than the dark around it. I couldn't make out details, just that it looked faintly human. Broad shoulders, maybe arms at its sides. But no features, no face, no movement. I didn't move at first. I was half sitting up, my body frozen under the blanket. My heart hadn't started racing yet. It was more confusion than fear at that point. I blinked a few times, wiped my eyes, leaned a little forward, but the shape didn't change. It didn't disappear like a trick of the eyes. It didn't move. It didn't sway like a curtain or cast a shadow. It was just there. I sat up fully, moving as quietly as I could, not wanting to spook whatever it was. I leaned a bit closer, narrowing my eyes. I didn't want to turn on a light. I didn't even want to breathe too loudly. Bella was still growling, a constant low rumble coming from her. That's what kept me grounded in that moment. Her reaction made it feel real. It didn't feel like sleep paralysis. I've had that once before in college, and this wasn't it. I could move. I was moving. I had control of my body, but I didn't feel in control. I felt watched, observed. I couldn't see eyes, but I knew it was looking at me. Not at Bella, not through me, at me. Like it had picked me specifically and was waiting for something. 10 minutes passed, maybe more. I didn't time it, but it felt long. Long enough that my knees started to ache from how I was sitting. My legs were tucked under me now, my arms stiff at my sides. I didn't blink much. I didn't want to. The moment felt like if I looked away, something would change. Or happen. It was like that feeling you get when you know someone's standing behind you, even if you haven't seen them yet. I kept asking myself, silently, over and over, what am I looking at? Is someone in my house? Did I forget to lock the door? Is this a person? But it didn't feel like a person. It didn't feel like an intruder. No sound of breaking in, no footsteps, just stillness. Then something strange happened. I didn't expect it. I was still locked onto that shape, but suddenly this feeling came over me. A wave of calm, like someone poured warm water through my chest. My breathing slowed. My hands, which I hadn't noticed were clenched, started to relax. My heartbeat, which had been pushing hard against my ribs, softened. I didn't feel safe. Not really, but I didn't feel scared anymore. I felt blank, like the fear had been scrubbed out of me. I lay back down slowly, keeping my eyes on that shape until the last second before my head hit the pillow. Bella had stopped growling. She was still standing, ears back, but silent now. I didn't even remember falling asleep. That's the part that sticks with me. One moment I was watching it, half laying down. The next I was waking up to sunlight coming through the window. Morning light makes everything seem smaller, softer. I sat up slowly, still under the blanket. My neck hurt, and I could tell I'd slept funny. My mouth was dry, like I hadn't moved it all night. The shape was gone. I looked at the corner first thing. Nothing there, just empty space. A blank stretch of wall next to an old bookshelf and a dusty plant stand. I stood up and walked over to that spot. I checked everything. The shape had been maybe 2 feet wide, tall, and solid looking. But there was nothing in that corner that could make a silhouette like that. No shadows from furniture. No coats. No chairs. Nothing tall. Nothing that matched what I saw. I even went as far as to stand in that corner and look out across the room to see what it would look like from the other angle. I didn't feel anything standing there. No echo of that feeling from the night before. Just a quiet room, morning light, and Bella sitting by the kitchen like nothing had happened. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't post about it. I didn't even write it down. Part of me didn't want to give it attention. Like naming it or retelling it would make it more real. But I never forgot it. That night stayed with me, tucked in the back of my mind like something half remembered from a fever dream. But here's what really changed. I never slept in the living room again. Not even naps. I couldn't. Every time I thought about lying down on that couch, I'd feel that same quiet tension crawl up my spine. I kept looking at that corner, every time I passed by it. Even now, years later, I still glance that way if I walk through the room at night. There's a difference between fear and memory. Fear fades. You can move past it. But memory has weight. And that night, whatever it was, whether it was something real or something my mind created, left a weight in that room. A memory that doesn't shift, doesn't soften, doesn't explain itself. And that's what makes it worse. The not knowing. The silence of it. Nothing ever happened again. No more shapes. No more late night wake-ups. Bella never growled at a corner again. But that feeling, that sense of something watching, of time slowing down and everything freezing, that never really left me. It just buried itself deep. Sometimes when I'm in another room late at night and everything is quiet, I'll remember how it felt to be awake, fully awake, with that shape in the dark across from me. Unmoving, unseen, but there. And I'll think about how my body just lay back down, like it had been told to, like something had decided it was finished. And I still don't know what that means. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to get scared while camping. I've been out in the woods alone plenty of times before, hiking, sleeping in a tent, cooking over a fire, and just enjoying the quiet. The forest always felt peaceful, even comforting. But this trip, the one I took last fall, changed all that. I picked a small state park that was known for being quiet and not too crowded. It was late September, early fall. The nights were chilly, with that crispness that makes you pull your sleeping bag tighter. The trees had started to turn orange and yellow, but most were still green. The park had only a few campsites open, and I ended up at the back end of the loop, where the woods were thick and the sounds of other campers were distant and faint. The perfect spot, I thought. I arrived mid-afternoon, unloaded my gear, and set up my tent on a flat patch just off a dirt road. The ground was covered with pine needles and dry leaves. There was a small creek, maybe 50 yards away, and the sun filtered through the canopy in soft golden light. The air smelled like damp earth and wood smoke from other campers' fires. I was alone as I had planned. No phone signal, no internet, just me and the woods. The first night was quiet. I cooked some instant soup on my little stove, stretched out in my sleeping bag, and listened to the night sounds, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves, the snap of twigs from squirrels or raccoons. I didn't hear anything unusual, just the natural noises you expect in the woods. I fell asleep easily. Then, on the second night, around 2 a.m., I woke up. It wasn't a loud noise, just a faint rustling sound near the tent flap. I lay very still, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I told myself it was just the wind or a branch brushing against the tent. Maybe a small animal trying to get close, looking for food. But when I opened my eyes and looked toward the flap, the movement stopped. No shadow, no figure, nothing. Just the slight flutter of the fabric. I kept my eyes on the flap for a while, but there was nothing more. I eventually drifted back to sleep, convincing myself I was just being jumpy. The next day, I thought about what had happened. I checked the campsite, looked around for signs of animals or people. No footprints near the tent flap, no broken branches, nothing out of place. The park was supposed to be safe. I told myself it was nothing. The third night, it happened again. At almost exactly 2 a.m., the tent flap rustled as if someone was peeking inside. I froze. I sat up slowly, my eyes locked on the moving fabric. The moon was behind some clouds, so I couldn't see clearly, but the outline of the tent flap shifted as if being pushed lightly. Still, no figure, no shadow, nothing. I grabbed my flashlight, pointed it toward the flap, and shone it outside. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the empty ground just outside the tent. Nothing. No one was there. I stayed awake for a long time after that, waiting for something to happen, but it never did. The next day, I told myself to stay alert. I thought maybe a curious person was wandering near the camp after hours. I was alone and didn't want anyone sneaking up on me or trying to mess with me. The fourth night was the worst. Around 2 a.m., I woke up again to the sound of the tent flap moving. This time, it wasn't just a little rustle. It sounded like someone was pushing it open slowly, deliberately. My heart slammed against my chest. I grabbed my small pocket knife that I kept near my sleeping bag and sat up fully. I looked toward the opening. The flap was moving, and then I saw it, barely, but the flap was wide open, the dark night outside spilling into the tent. I quickly shone my flashlight toward the opening. The breeze had pushed the flap back, but there was still no one there. I stood up slowly, keeping my knife in hand, and looked around my small tent. No sign of anyone. The moon had come out from behind the clouds and lit the forest floor outside. I stepped out carefully to look around, checking the perimeter of my sight. Nothing. No footprints, no signs of disturbance. I shut the flap tightly, zipped it closed, and went back inside, locking the tent poles in place the best I could. The next day, I searched more carefully around the campsite. I looked for tracks, scuffed dirt, anything. I found some deer tracks and a few raccoon prints near my cooler, but no human footprints. It didn't make sense. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept the flashlight and knife close. I stayed awake until almost 3 a.m., but nothing moved outside the tent. The fifth night was when things got really strange. I had just fallen asleep when I heard the flap again. I woke up fully, heart pounding. This time, the flap wasn't just rustling. It was wide open. The cold night air blew inside, and I could see the trees silhouetted against the moonlight. I sat up fast and grabbed my flashlight. I scanned the ground inside the tent and spotted something lying near my sleeping bag. It was a photo. I picked it up slowly and shone the flashlight on it. It was a picture of me sleeping inside the tent. The photo was taken from the inside. I was curled up on my side, eyes closed, unaware. I dropped the photo in shock and looked around frantically. The flap was wide open, and someone had clearly been inside the tent while I slept. I froze. My mind raced. How could someone get inside without me hearing? I hadn't noticed any sounds except the flap. I'd slept deeply until the noise woke me. I zipped the tent closed as fast as I could, but now the feeling of safety was gone. I sat in the dark, clutching the photo, thinking about who could have done this. There was no one camping close enough to explain it. The park was nearly empty, and I hadn't heard anyone walking near me after dark. The thought that someone had been so close, watching me sleep, terrified me. I wanted to pack up and leave immediately, but it was still the middle of the night. I didn't want to walk alone in the dark through the woods. I stayed awake the rest of the night, clutching the knife, flashlight, and the photo. When dawn finally came, I packed up as fast as I could. I double-checked everything, stuffed the photo in my backpack, and hurried down the dirt road toward the park exit. On the way out, I thought about calling the park rangers, but I wasn't sure what I could say. They might think I was crazy. I didn't have proof besides a photo, and I didn't know who could have done it or why. Back home, I developed the photo to see if it gave me any clues. The quality wasn't great. It looked like it was taken on a phone camera with low light, but I could make out the shape of someone's hand holding the phone near the flap of the tent. I looked closely at the shadows and edges and spotted a faint outline near the tent's opening. It was someone crouching just outside, their face hidden behind the tent fabric. That's when I realized this wasn't an accident or a prank. Someone had been stalking me in the woods. They had slipped in and out of my campsite quietly every night around the same time, taking pictures, watching me sleep, and disappearing without a sound. I never went back to that park. I reported the incident to the park authorities and the local police. They said they would increase patrols at night, but they never found who did it. I kept the photo, a reminder that out in the woods, no matter how safe it feels, there can be someone watching. Since then, I've learned to trust my instincts more, to camp where others can hear or see me, and to always keep my gear close. The woods can be peaceful, but sometimes the quiet hides things far more unsettling than animals or the wind. The night had fallen deep and thick, settling over the forest like a heavy blanket. I was alone in my campsite, tucked away in a remote part of the woods I'd found after a long hike that day. The small fire I'd built was nearly dead, just a few glowing embers struggling against the cold, dark air. I'd already eaten my dinner, dried out my wet socks by the flames, and settled into my sleeping bag inside my tent. Everything was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses on you until even the smallest sound feels loud. I lay there listening, my mind starting to wander, when I heard it, soft whispers, so faint I thought I was imagining them. At first, it was just a vague murmur, like the wind brushing through the leaves. But then I heard it clearly. Someone was calling my name. Not shouting or urgent, just a low, breathy whisper that seemed to drift from somewhere deep in the trees around me. The voice wasn't loud or sharp. It was smooth, almost gentle, but it cut through the silence like a knife. I froze, staring out through the mesh of my tent, my heart beating fast. The voice called again softly, "Chris," it was my name, unmistakably. I swallowed hard, feeling a cold sweat on my back, and for a moment I wanted to just stay silent and wait for whatever it was to pass. But then my curiosity got the better of me. I leaned out of the tent, peering into the darkness beyond the small circle of light from my dying fire. The woods stretched in all directions, shadowed and still, tall trees standing like silent sentinels. I called back, my voice low but steady. "Who's there?" That's when it happened. The voice answered, but it wasn't just calling my name anymore. It spoke back in my own voice. It wasn't someone else's voice trying to sound like me. It was exactly like I was speaking, perfectly mimicked, almost like an echo of myself. The whisper was so close, so clear, it sent a shock through me that tightened my chest. I sat back, pulling the tent flap closed, suddenly feeling like I was not alone. I told myself it must be my own voice playing tricks on me. The wind, maybe, or the way the forest carries sound through the trees. I've heard about those natural echoes before. Sometimes voices can bounce weirdly in the woods. But this was different. It was too exact, too deliberate. The fire flickered out. leaving only the faint silver light of the moon filtering through the branches. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, my boots crunching on dry leaves. The forest was alive with night sounds, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, the distant hoot of an owl, the snap of a twig breaking somewhere nearby. But none of those made me jump like the whispering did. I called my name again, louder this time, and the voice answered with my words, exactly as I'd said them, repeating my own voice back to me. It wasn't a reply, not really. It was more like my voice trapped and thrown back at me from the dark. I shone my flashlight into the trees, spinning slowly, trying to catch sight of anyone or anything that might be hiding there. The light caught the rough bark of trees, the thick tangle of bushes, but nothing moved. I stood there for a long time, heart pounding, trying to understand what I was hearing. The forest seemed to hold its breath with me, every sound suddenly sharper. Then I noticed something strange. When I moved, the voice would move too, always keeping the same distance from me, repeating what I said but delayed, like it was always just behind me, always copying. It felt like I was in a trap, like the forest itself was holding a mirror to my voice. I tried not to panic, but the unease grew heavier. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Not supernatural, but deeply, unnervingly wrong. I decided to pack up and leave. I grabbed my pack, stuffed the tent into its bag, and started walking down the trail back to my car. The moon was behind clouds now, and the forest was darker than ever. I kept my flashlight in front of me, swinging it left and right, ears straining for any sign of footsteps or another voice. But the whispers followed me. Every time I called out, the voice returned. It didn't say anything new. It just repeated my words, always in my own voice. When I said, "Who's there?" the answer was always my own voice, exactly the same, just a few seconds later. It was like a broken tape recorder stuck in a loop. The sound echoed from every direction, but no source appeared. I tried to shake it off, thinking maybe it was some kind of trick of the wind or the way the trees shape sound, or maybe a prank from another camper. But I was miles from the nearest campground, and I hadn't seen anyone else all day. No footprints on the trail, no sign of another human anywhere. As I walked, I started noticing other things. My footsteps sounded different, heavier but not mine. When I glanced behind, there was nothing there. Yet the whispers were always there, matching my calls. I stopped at a small clearing and sat on a fallen log, tried to calm down. The cold air was biting at my skin, and my breath came out in small clouds. I felt like I was losing my mind. Then, I realized something. The voice wasn't just copying me. It was anticipating me. Every time I hesitated, the voice would start repeating what I was about to say before I even said it. I thought maybe my brain was playing tricks, but the timing was too exact. I felt trapped in a strange kind of silence, where the forest wasn't quiet, but filled with the sound of my own voice, distorted and stretched. It was like I was being followed by a shadow of myself, a copy that could speak but had no body. The next hour was the worst. I tried to ignore the voice, but it only grew louder in the silence. I stopped talking altogether, hoping the whisper would go away if I stayed quiet. But the forest seemed to fill with a soft murmur anyway, like the sound of dozens of me whispering, calling my name from the darkness. My mind raced, looking for an explanation. I thought maybe I was overheated or dehydrated. The isolation, the stress, the long hike. Maybe I was hallucinating. I'd heard of something like that before. When your brain is pushed too far, it can create voices, repeat sounds, or make you hear things that aren't there. I forced myself to focus on the trail, putting one foot in front of the other, heading back toward the car. The whispers slowed and faded when I started moving faster, but they never stopped completely. When I finally reached the edge of the forest where the trees opened to the gravel road leading to the parking lot, the voice stopped. The silence that followed was sharp and sudden, like a door closing behind me. I looked back into the trees, half expecting to see something standing there, waiting. But there was nothing, just dark trunks and shadows. Back at my car, I sat inside, breathing hard, trying to steady my nerves. I checked my phone. No signal, of course. I sat there for a long time, trying to understand what had happened. The next day, I talked to a ranger at the park entrance. I told him about the whispers, about the voice that sounded like me repeating everything I said. He nodded slowly, and then explained something that made everything clearer. He said the area I camped in was known for its acoustic oddities. The way the forest was shaped, the hills, the rocks, the density of the trees, could cause sounds to bounce and echo in strange ways. Sometimes, voices would carry and loop around the hills, creating what sounded like someone answering you from the woods. People sometimes thought it was a spirit or something supernatural, but it was really just nature playing tricks on sound. He told me that people had reported hearing their own voices echoed back to them, sometimes delayed, sometimes slightly distorted. It was easy to get spooked, especially at night when your mind was already on edge. He said the whispering wasn't real in the sense of a person being there. It was just sound waves bouncing back to me, carrying my own voice in a strange loop through the trees. Hearing that made me feel a little better, but it also made the whole thing feel even more eerie. It wasn't a ghost or a creature. It was just me, trapped in a strange echo chamber of my own voice. That night in the forest wasn't supernatural, but it was one of the most unsettling experiences I've ever had. It reminded me how easily our minds can be tricked by nature when we're tired, alone, and surrounded by the unknown. The woods don't need monsters to be scary. Sometimes all it takes is your own voice coming back to you from the dark, calling your name in a whisper that sounds like you, but isn't quite right. After that, I never camped in that part of the forest again. Even now, when I think about it, I can still hear that whisper in my head, soft and close, like a shadow of myself just out of reach. The cabin was supposed to be a quiet getaway. I found it online, a small place deep in the woods, far from anything. No neighbors for miles, no cell service, just nature and silence. It sounded perfect. I needed a break from the noise of the city, the constant buzz of people and traffic. Just a few days alone, some fresh air, and maybe a good hike. I told myself I'd take my time, slow down, and enjoy the peace. When I arrived, the sun was already dipping low behind the trees. The gravel road leading to the cabin was narrow, twisting, and lined with tall pines that blocked most of the sky. The air smelled like pine needles and wet earth. It was cool, early fall, and the leaves were just starting to turn. Yellow and orange mixed with green, the forest looked alive and quiet at the same time. The cabin was small, built from old logs that had darkened with age. It sat on a slight rise, looking out over a clearing where the grass had grown long and wild. A small porch wrapped around the front, the wood creaking under my feet as I stepped inside. The place smelled like damp wood and something faintly like old smoke. The fireplace was stone, big and old, with ashes still in the hearth. The floor was rough wood, scratched and worn. The furniture was sparse, a table and a couple of chairs, a small bed pushed into a corner, and a metal stove for cooking. I dropped my pack and opened a window to let in fresh air. The sun was nearly gone now, and the forest outside grew darker, the shadows thickening. I could hear the wind in the trees, a soft but steady sound, and far off the occasional bird call. No cars, no voices, just nature. I unpacked a few things, a book, some food, and my flashlight. I lit the stove and made a simple meal, the warm glow filling the room. Outside, the wind picked up a little, rustling the leaves and making the cabin creak softly. It wasn't cold yet, but I added some wood to the fire just in case. After eating, I sat by the window, watching as the forest grew darker. The last light faded quickly, replaced by deep blue shadows. The stars started to appear, small pinpricks of light scattered across the sky. It was beautiful and peaceful. I thought about how far away I was from everything. No distractions, no noise, just the woods and me. I went to bed early, tired from the drive. The bed was stiff and not very comfortable, but it was warm enough. I left the fire burning low in the stove, the glow barely lighting the room. Outside, the wind sounded stronger now, whistling through the trees and pushing branches against the cabin walls. It was the kind of night that felt alive, like the forest was breathing around me. I didn't sleep well. Every little noise seemed louder in the dark. The creak of the wood, the scrape of branches, the snap of twigs. I kept thinking I heard something moving just outside the window, but when I looked, there was nothing there. I told myself it was just the wind and my imagination. The next morning, I woke early. The sun was just starting to filter through the trees, casting long beams of light across the floor. I made coffee on the stove and ate a quick breakfast. Outside, the forest looked calm and bright, the air fresh with the scent of pine and damp earth. I decided to take a hike to stretch my legs. I packed a small bag with water, some snacks, and my phone, though I knew there was no signal, and headed out. The trail was narrow and rough, winding through the trees and up a small hill. The ground was soft and covered with fallen leaves. I walked slowly, listening to the sounds of the forest, birds, squirrels, the rustle of the wind. The sunlight filtered through the branches, creating patterns on ground. About an hour in, I came to a small stream. The water was clear and cold, running over smooth stones. I knelt to take a drink and rested for a moment, watching the water flow. The forest was still, almost too quiet. No birds, no animals, just the sound of the stream and the wind in the leaves. It felt peaceful, but there was also something strange about the silence. I stood up and continued on the trail, but as I walked, I noticed the trees looked different. The bark was rougher, the branches twisted in odd shapes. The light was dimmer here, the forest thicker and darker. The path narrowed and became harder to follow. I kept going, telling myself I'd turn back soon. Suddenly, I heard a noise behind me. It was soft, like a footstep on dry leaves. I stopped and listened. The forest was quiet again. I took a few steps forward, then the noise came again, closer this time. I turned quickly, but saw nothing. Just trees and shadows. I started walking faster, heart pounding. The trail became less clear, covered with sticks and leaves. I tripped over a root and fell hard onto the ground. My hands scraped against the dirt and rocks, and I tasted blood. I sat up, breathing hard, and looked around. The forest seemed darker, the trees closing in. I stood up and decided to head back. The noise came again, but this time it wasn't footsteps. It was a low rustling, like something moving through the bushes. I shone my flashlight into the trees, the beam cutting through the darkness. For a moment, I thought I saw eyes reflecting the light, but when I blinked, they were gone. I started running, following the trail as best as I could. The wind whipped through the branches, and the sound of the rustling got louder, chasing me. My legs ached. My breath came fast and shallow. I didn't look back. I just kept running. After what felt like forever, I broke through the trees and saw the clearing where the cabin sat. The porch light was still on, the small fire burning in the stove, glowing warmly through the window. I stumbled up the steps and locked the door behind me. Inside, I leaned against the door, panting and sweating. My hand was shaking. I looked out the window, but the forest was quiet again. No rustling, no movement, just the wind in the trees. I checked the locks and closed all the windows. I grabbed a knife from my pack, something sharp and heavy, and sat by the fire. The night stretched on slowly, each minute feeling longer than the last. I kept listening, waiting for any sound. Around midnight, the wind died down. The forest outside was still and silent. I felt myself relax a little, but I stayed awake until the first light of dawn. When the sun came up, I opened the door and stepped outside. The forest looked peaceful, just like before. No sign of anything strange. I packed my things quickly and left the cabin that morning. The drive back was quiet. I didn't stop until I was back on the highway, surrounded by cars and noise. The city felt loud and overwhelming, but safe. I never went back to that cabin. The memory of the night stayed with me. The feeling of being watched, the silence that wasn't really silence, the strange rustling in the dark. It wasn't ghosts or monsters, just the wild, unpredictable forest. And sometimes, that's more frightening than anything else. I was driving alone on a mountain road late at night. The kind of road where there are no streetlights, no houses, and barely any other cars. Just sharp turns tall pine trees pressing in on both sides, and the distant sound of wind through the branches. I'd been on this route a few times before, but never this late and never alone. The night was quiet except for the hum of my tires on the asphalt and the occasional crackle of the radio, which I kept low to avoid feeling too alone. The road was narrow and winding, climbing higher as it twisted through the mountain. I had my headlights on, cutting bright white beams through the dark. The beam bounced off the yellow lines, the trees, the guardrails that showed me the edge of the road. I knew the bends well, so I kept my speed steady, slow enough to handle the sharp turns, but fast enough to keep moving without too much tension building inside me. About 20 minutes in, as I was coming around a long right bend, I caught the flicker of another vehicle's taillights in my rearview mirror. It was far behind, maybe a quarter of a mile back. I barely noticed it at first, thinking it was just someone else driving the same road. But as the minutes passed, the red glow didn't get smaller. It stayed the same size, like that vehicle was keeping pace with me no matter what I did. I glanced over my shoulder several times. The car behind me didn't have its headlights on. There were no bright beams shining through the mirror, no flashing lights or anything. Just two dim red dots glowing steadily in the dark. It was so close I could almost read the license plate if my headlights hit it, but they didn't because they were off. No headlights, just the red taillights, glowing faintly through the night. The road narrowed even more as I climbed, and the trees grew thicker. The moon was low and hidden behind clouds, so the only light came from my car's headlights and those red dots behind me. My stomach tightened. Something about that car felt wrong. It was illegal to drive without headlights on a road like this, especially at night. And it was keeping pace behind me like it was following. I slowed down slightly to see if it would pass me. Usually, if someone is behind you for a while, they'll want to go faster or take the lead. But this car stayed right behind, matching my speed perfectly. Every time I accelerated around a corner or down a straight stretch, those taillights stayed steady behind me, like they were watching. I didn't dare look away for long. The highway curves were getting sharper now, and the trees were so close I could see branches scraping against the side of my car as I turned. The sound of the tires gripping the pavement filled the silence. I wanted to believe that the car behind was just another driver like me, maybe lost or tired, but my gut told me otherwise. I remember the stories people told about that stretch of road, drivers getting followed or worse, but I pushed those thoughts away. The rational part of me said maybe the driver behind me had a broken headlight, or maybe it was an emergency vehicle of some kind. But no sirens, no flashing lights, no other signs. I tried to stay calm. I kept my eyes forward, checking the mirrors often. The car stayed exactly the same distance behind me, close enough to see the glow of the red lights, but never passing, never leaving. It was like it was stuck on my tail. Then I came to a sharp left bend, the kind that cuts through a cliff edge with a steep drop on one side. My car's headlights caught the guardrail and the jagged rocks far below. I slowed even more, taking the turn carefully, hugging the inside lane. As I rounded the bend, the red lights behind me suddenly vanished. One moment they were there, just a little way back, and the next moment they were gone. No flash of passing, no quick disappearance. Just nothing. My heart jumped. I stopped the car at the edge of the turn and looked back over my shoulder and down the road. The headlights still cut bright slices through the dark in front, but behind me, only blackness. No other cars, no tail lights. I waited a minute. The row behind me was empty. I started to wonder if I had imagined it, but the feeling in my chest wouldn't let me. It had been too real. Then, as I sat there, I noticed something on the ground near the guardrail where I had stopped. There was a long, deep scrape in the asphalt, like a car had braked hard or slid on the road. The marks curved sharply, following the bend exactly where the car behind me must have been. I got out of my car and walked closer. The night air was cold and smelled like pine and wet earth. The scrape was fresh, the black tar torn up and rough. And next to the scrape, a faint patch of oil stained the pavement. It looked like something had been leaking. I crouched down to get a better look. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. The scrape was too perfect, too deliberate. It looked like someone had lost control, or maybe someone had purposely swerved to disappear around that bend. I thought about what might have happened to the driver behind me. Did they hit the guardrail? Did their car spin out? Or did they stop somewhere hidden waiting to come back. I looked up and down the road. The trees were thick and the steep drop was on one side, meaning there was no shoulder or place to pull off easily. If a car had crashed there, I probably wouldn't see it right away, especially at night. I sat back in my car, my hands shaking a little. I wasn't sure what was more unsettling, that the car had followed me with no lights or that it had vanished without a trace. I thought about calling the police or reporting it, but cell service was spotty at best on this road. I was miles from the nearest town, and I wasn't even sure if I had the strength to keep driving. Still, I knew I had to get off that mountain road. I turned the key, started the engine, and began to drive again. This time, I kept my eyes glued to the road and the mirrors, watching for any sign of that car coming back. For the next 10 miles, nothing followed me. No red lights, no shadow behind me, just the steady hum of my tires and the wind through the trees. When I finally reached the highway that led to the town, my phone signal returned. I called the local sheriff's office and told them what I'd seen. They asked for details about the scrape and the oil and promised to check the area. The next day, I drove back with a friend who was more familiar with the area. We stopped at the bend. Sure enough, the scrape was still there, and the oil stain had darkened, fresh and unmistakable. They said cars had crashed there before, often because of the tight turn and narrow road. It was a spot where it was easy to lose control, especially at night. I learned later that the vehicle with no headlights probably had a mechanical failure, and maybe the driver was trying to keep up behind me, hoping for help. Or maybe they lost control and crashed just out of sight. It was terrifying to think about being followed like that. But what scared me most was knowing how easy it was for something bad to happen on that road in the dark, and how close I'd been to a real accident without even realizing it. That night stayed with me, not because of ghosts or monsters, but because of the raw, real danger that lurks on quiet mountain roads when the world is silent and you're alone. We all needed a break. After months of work, stress, and city noise, my friends and I decided to rent a cabin out in the woods for the weekend. It was a small group, just 5 of us, and we figured it'd be a good way to unwind. No Wi-Fi, no distractions, just the forest and each other. The place was tucked deep in the woods, a couple hours drive from the nearest town. The kind of place that feels like it's been forgotten, hidden away from the world. The cabin itself looked older than we expected. Weathered wood siding, a sagging porch, windows with dusty panes. There was an old wood stove inside, a dining table scratched from years of use, and a stack of firewood that looked like it hadn't been touched in a while. It wasn't fancy, but it had charm, and more important, it was isolated. The first day went well enough. We unpacked, set up our things, and went for a hike nearby. The forest was thick, with tall pines that blocked most of the sunlight. Birds chirped, leaves rustled in the breeze, and there was a quiet stillness that felt strange but also peaceful. After dinner, we sat around a fire pit outside, drinking and telling stories under the stars. No one mentioned the eerie feeling that settled over me when I looked up at the dark tree line, but I felt it all the same, like something was watching from just beyond sight. That first night, we all crashed early. The cabin creaked as the wind blew through the trees. At first, it was comforting, the sounds of an old house settling. But as the night grew late, the noises started to feel different, more deliberate somehow. The floorboards groaned in places where no one was walking. A window rattled softly in its frame. I convinced myself it was nothing and fell asleep. The second night is when things got strange. I woke up in the middle of the night because I felt cold, even though the fire had burned low in the stove. I rubbed my arms, trying to warm up, and when I opened my eyes, I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the room near the window. It wasn't clear, more like a shadow, a dark shape that didn't move or blink. It just stood there, silent, staring in my direction. My heart slammed against my ribs. I blinked hard, thinking it was a trick of the light or maybe my tired mind playing games. But when I opened my eyes again, the figure was gone. The room was empty. I lay still for a long time, eyes wide, waiting for some sound or movement. But there was nothing except the faint creak of the cabin settling again. I didn't want to wake anyone else, so I kept quiet, and eventually fell back to sleep, though my mind stayed restless. The next morning, I didn't say anything about it. I figured maybe it was just a shadow or my imagination fueled by the old cabin's atmosphere. But I noticed the others looked tired too, acting a little off. As the day passed, small things started happening. At first, it was subtle, like a misplaced book on the shelf or a chair slightly pushed away from the table. We joked about it being a prank or one of us sleepwalking, but then the odd stuff grew harder to explain. One morning, we found strange scratches on the living room wall. Thin, deep lines that looked fresh, almost clawed into the wood. None of us had done it. We all agreed because we'd been careful around the cabin, not wanting to damage anything. The air inside the cabin felt heavier, colder. No matter how many logs we threw on the stove or how many windows we opened to air it out, that chill stuck around. It wasn't like the cold from outside. It was more like the temperature dropped in patches, moving through the rooms unpredictably. At night, I found myself waking up again, listening to noises I couldn't explain. Footsteps, faint and distant, coming from the porch or the hallway. Doors that seemed to close softly on their own. Sometimes the creaking floorboards felt too close, like someone walking right next to my bed. None of us saw the shadow figure again, but the feeling never left. We started sleeping in shifts, one of us always awake to keep an eye on the cabin. On the third night, the tension was thick. No one spoke much, and when we did, our voices were low and shaky. We kept the fire stove burning late, and I stayed awake, watching the shadows dance on the walls. I went over every possible explanation in my head. Animals, branches brushing windows, the house settling, exhaustion messing with our minds. But none of it really fit all the pieces. Then, during the day, we found something in the attic. We hadn't planned to go up there. It was dark, dusty, and cramped, but someone noticed an old trunk in the corner covered in cobwebs. We pried it open, and inside was a stack of old papers and photographs, yellowed and brittle with age. One photo caught my eye right away. It was a faded black and white picture of a man standing proudly in front of the cabin. His clothes were from decades ago, maybe the 50s or 60s. He looked serious, almost grim. But behind him, in the shadows of the photo, was a dark shape, tall and vague. The shape had the same outline as the shadow figure I'd seen the night before. We passed the photo around quietly, each of us unsettled. The man was the cabin's previous owner, a fact confirmed by some old letters and documents in the trunk. The story was strange. He had disappeared without explanation years ago, leaving the cabin abandoned until it was rented again. It hit me hard. Whatever we were feeling, seeing, or experiencing wasn't some ghost story or folklore. There was something real here, something tied to the history of the cabin and that missing man. The scratches, the cold spots, the shadow. Maybe it was a person or someone who used the cabin before us. Maybe the man didn't just disappear. Maybe something happened to him, something that left a mark on the place. We packed up that night. None of us wanted to stay a moment longer. The air inside the cabin was oppressive, heavy with secrets and unspoken threats. We didn't talk much on the drive back, each lost in our thoughts about what had happened. In the weeks after, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd stumbled on something dangerous. Not supernatural, but very real. The kind of danger that hides in silence, in shadowy corners of abandoned places, waiting for the next person to come too close. I never went back to that cabin, and if I ever hear about it again, I'll remember the photo, the dark figure standing silently behind a man who vanished without a trace, and the cold weight of something watching, just out of sight. I inherited the cabin from my late grandfather. It was a small, weather-beaten place deep in the woods, miles from the nearest town. My grandfather had kept it for decades, rarely visiting in his final years, but it was his home, and now it was mine. The moment I drove up the long, winding dirt road that ended at the cabin, I felt a strange mix of excitement and unease. The air smelled of damp pine and earth. The trees around the cabin were tall and thick, their branches tangled like giant fingers reaching over the roof. The wood of the cabin was aged and gray, with patches of moss clinging to the corners. The windows were dusty and dark, hiding whatever might be inside. The first few days I spent cleaning and organizing, trying to make the place my own. The cabin had been left almost untouched since my grandfather passed, and the dust and cobwebs told stories of years spent alone. I found his old furniture, a few cracked mugs in the kitchen, and stacks of yellowed newspapers in the corner. The electricity had been shut off, so I worked mostly during daylight, using candles at night. The quiet was heavy, almost suffocating. One afternoon, I decided to explore the basement. I had never been down there before. My grandfather had always kept it locked. The wooden stairs creaked under my feet as I descended into the dim space. The basement was cold and smelled musty, filled with old tools, boxes, and broken furniture. As I moved around, my flashlight beam caught on a small door set into the far wall, almost hidden behind some crates. It was a narrow door with a rusty lock I had never noticed. Curiosity got the better of me. I pulled my pocket knife from my jacket and started working on the lock, my hands trembling a little. After a few minutes, the lock gave way with a soft click. The door swung open to reveal a tiny room, no bigger than a closet. Inside was a small wooden table with a single, battered leather-bound diary resting on it. The pages were brittle and yellowed, but the writing was still clear. The handwriting was shaky and uneven, like the writer had been writing in fear or haste. The entries were dated, going back many years, and I realized this was my grandfather's diary. As I flipped through the pages, a chill ran down my spine. The diary was full of terrifying stories, strange noises outside the cabin at night, the feeling of being watched, footsteps crunching through the leaves even when no one was supposed to be around. He wrote about a presence in the woods, something he called the Watcher. The entries grew darker as the weeks passed. He described hearing heavy breathing just beyond the windows, finding strange scratches on the doorframe, and once seeing tall shadows move between the trees. His handwriting became messier, his words more frantic. One of the last entries stopped me cold. Tonight, it came closer than ever before. I don't know what it is, but it watches, waits, never leaves. It knows I'm alone. I'm locking the door now, hiding this diary here. If you find it, don't open it. Don't let it inside. The final page was smudged, as if he had tried to write more, but was interrupted. There were no more entries. I sat in the dark basement, holding the diary tightly, my heart pounding. Part of me wanted to leave the cabin immediately, but something made me stay. I put the diary in my backpack and locked the small door again, hoping to forget what I had read. That night, I was restless. I lay awake on the creaky bed, the cabin eerily silent except for the faint whistle of wind through the trees. Suddenly, a deep rattling sound shook the windows. It was rhythmic, like something large was moving just outside, trying to force its way in. My breath caught in my throat as the noise grew louder. Then I heard heavy footsteps thumping softly on the wooden porch, circling the cabin slowly, deliberately. I pulled the blankets over my head, trying to convince myself it was just an animal. But the footsteps didn't sound like any animal I knew. They were too heavy, too slow, like a person carrying something big and heavy. I forced myself to peek out the window, holding my breath. There was nothing there. The trees were still, shadows stretching long in the moonlight. The porch was empty, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave me. I stayed up the rest of the night, eyes glued to every window, listening to the silence that fell back over the cabin. The next morning, I found fresh scratches on the doorframe, just like my grandfather had described. The wood was torn and splintered, as if something sharp had tried to claw its way inside. I locked every door and window, making sure everything was secure, but the fear settled in deep. Over the next few days, the strange noises continued. Footsteps circling the cabin, branches snapping just beyond the edge of the clearing, and sometimes a low, guttural sound that I couldn't place. The phone had no signal here, and the nearest neighbor was miles away, so I was completely alone. I started keeping the diary close, reading it over and over for clues. My grandfather had written about signs to watch for, times when the watcher was most active, and ways he tried to keep it away. But nothing seemed to work. The watcher stayed just outside, invisible but always present. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the forest darkened, I decided to face it. I went outside, flashlight in hand, and walked slowly around the cabin, calling out into the silence. The trees were still, the air thick with the smell of wet earth and pine. I found broken twigs and deep footprints in the dirt, footprints too large to be human. I didn't see anything, but I knew I wasn't alone. The watcher was out there, somewhere, watching me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I hurried back inside, locking the door behind me. From then on, I kept the cabin secure and avoided going outside at night. I spent most of my time reading the diary, trying to understand what I was dealing with. The last entry haunted me. Don't let it inside. I didn't know what it was, but I wasn't going to find out the hard way. Days passed, and the footsteps continued, always circling, never breaking in. I made sure all the windows were locked tight, nailed boards over the weakest ones, and kept a heavy knife by my bed. The nights were long and sleepless, the silence broken only by the occasional sound of branches snapping or the windows rattling. Then one morning, I found a gap in the boards over the back window, wide enough for something to squeeze through. I checked the rest of the cabin, but nothing else was disturbed. I felt a surge of panic, but tried to stay calm. If the watcher was trying to get in, I had to be ready. I spent the next days reinforcing every entrance and making sure I was never alone in the cabin. I kept a fire burning in the fireplace to keep warm and stayed close to the center of the house. The footsteps came every night without fail, but they never tried to break in again. Slowly, I started to piece together what my grandfather had feared. The watcher wasn't a ghost or some supernatural being. It was something real, an animal or a person living in the woods, watching the cabin, waiting for the right moment. Maybe it was a wild animal, or maybe something darker, someone who had been in those woods too long, losing their mind or worse. I realized my grandfather had been trying to protect himself from something dangerous, but couldn't explain it clearly. The warning in the diary was simple: keep it outside. Don't let it inside, no matter what. After 2 weeks, I finally felt brave enough to leave. I packed my things, locked the cabin one last time, and drove away down the long dirt road. I didn't look back. I never returned to that cabin. The memory of those nights, the heavy footsteps, the rattling windows, the feeling of being watched, stayed with me for years. I kept the diary safe, but never opened it again. Some things are better left alone. That cabin, and whatever watched from the woods, remained a dark secret of the past. Real, terrifying, and waiting quietly just beyond the trees. The night had settled in deep, heavier than any night I'd experienced in a long time. The woods around our campsite were dark and silent, except for the soft crackle of the fire we had built earlier. Our group was made up of 5 friends, me included, and we had set up camp in a small clearing surrounded by thick trees. The kind of trees that block out any moonlight or distant city glow. So the night was pitch black beyond the firelight. We'd been talking and laughing earlier, passing around a bottle of water, sharing stories, just enjoying the quiet that only comes when you're away from phones and the usual noise of everyday life. The fire was dying down slowly, the logs giving off a soft, warm glow. My eyelids were starting to feel heavy, and I was glad when a few of the others decided to turn in early. We all had our sleeping bags stretched out around the fire pit, close enough to keep the fire going for a while, but spread out just enough for some personal space. I was just about to close my eyes when I heard it, a soft crunch of footsteps coming from somewhere just beyond the edge of the clearing. I froze. The sound was faint, but it was definitely there. Footsteps on dry leaves and twigs, slow and deliberate. Not the usual rustling of small animals or the wind moving through the branches. I nudged one of my friends who was lying near me. His eyes flicked open and we both sat up listening. The footsteps stopped, and a few seconds later, we saw it. 2 beams of light, flashlights, moving slowly and carefully between the trees on the far side of the clearing. We all sat up fully now, alert. The others had woken up too, rubbing their eyes and trying to make sense of the moving lights. Nobody said a word. The footsteps started again, and the flashlights moved closer to the edge of our camp, just beyond where the firelight reached. At first, I thought it was one of our friends going for a late-night bathroom break or checking something outside the tents, but then I remembered. Everyone had said they were staying put, too tired to move. We all agreed earlier we'd stick together. Something about the way the lights moved felt wrong, like whoever was out there wasn't just wandering, but searching for something. Or maybe someone. I quietly grabbed my own flashlight from the ground and motioned for the others to follow. We slipped out of our sleeping bags and moved toward the trees, careful not to make noise. The fire flickered behind us, a small bright circle in the dark, and the cold night air bit at my skin. The forest smelled like wet leaves and pine needles. The flashlights moved again, this time circling the edge of our camp, swinging slowly between the trees. It was like whoever was carrying them was trying to stay just out of sight, but close enough to see what was inside the clearing. I felt my heart pounding in my chest, a tight knot in my stomach. My mind raced. Was this someone from outside the group? A hiker? A hunter? Someone with bad intentions? We stayed low, moving quietly through the underbrush, trying to keep the flashlights in sight without being seen. As we got closer, I caught a glimpse of the person carrying the light. They were wearing dark clothes, the kind that would blend in well with the night. Their face was hidden by a hood or a hat, so I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. The group whispered among themselves, questions hanging in the air, but no answers. We decided to move closer to try to get a better look, but as we advanced, the flashlights suddenly stopped. The footsteps ceased again. It was completely silent. We held our breath. The forest seemed to hold its own breath with us, waiting. Then, without warning, the flashlights swung sharply back into the woods and disappeared. The footsteps, too, moved off quickly, crunching through leaves and twigs, heading away from the camp. We followed the sounds as quietly as we could, weaving through trees and dodging branches. The footprints they left in the dirt were fresh, too deep to be an animal. After a few minutes, the sounds and lights faded into the distance. The forest swallowed them whole, and all that was left was the quiet hum of night insects and the distant call of an owl. We stood there for a long moment, looking at each other in the dark, trying to figure out what just happened. Everyone was shaken, but nobody wanted to speak first. Then I realized something. When we had first seen the flashlights, none of us had checked if anyone was missing from camp. So we turned back, walking fast, anxious to get back to our tents and make sure everyone was okay. As we stepped into the clearing, our flashlights bounced off the tents, the sleeping bags, the backpacks, all still there. Inside the tents, faint shadows moved as people stirred awake. We called out quietly, and each friend answered back, sleepy and confused. No one had left camp. No one had moved or walked outside in the night. We gathered in the fire pit's circle again, voices hushed but tense. No one had gone out. The only people around were us and whoever had been walking outside in the woods, shining flashlights near our camp. It didn't make sense. If none of us had left, who had been there? We checked the perimeter again, flashlight beams scanning the edges of the clearing, but we found nothing. No footprints going away, no signs that anyone had been there besides us. The dirt around the camp was undisturbed except for our own tracks. A cold feeling crept over me. Not from the night air, but from the thought of someone so close, so near to us, but completely unseen. The idea that someone had been circling us quietly, watching us, made my skin crawl. We sat back down by the fire, still alert. We decided to keep the fire burning bright the rest of the night and to stay awake in shifts, each watching the edge of the forest. No one wanted to say it, but the possibility of someone with bad intentions had crept into our minds and refused to leave. The rest of the night passed slowly, with every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves setting us on edge. The stars wheeled above us in a clear sky. The forest silent except for our nervous whispers and the crackling fire. When dawn finally came, pale and cool, we packed up fast and left that clearing without looking back. The sun brought warmth and safety that night had stolen away. We never found out who had been there, circling our camp, shining those flashlights in the dark. But the memory of that night, the feeling of being watched and surrounded by something unseen, but very real, stayed with me long after we returned to the safety of our homes. The woods can hold secrets, not all explained, but some are just too close for comfort. And sometimes the scariest thing isn't a ghost or a monster. It's knowing that someone was out there, near you, when you thought you were alone. The forest was thick and quiet, the kind of quiet that presses in on you and makes every small sound feel louder than it should. I had been hiking for hours, lost in my own thoughts, enjoying the way the tall trees filtered the late afternoon sunlight into soft green patterns on the forest floor. The air smelled fresh and earthy, a mix of damp leaves, pine, and moss. The deeper I went, the more I noticed the broken branches and piles of cut wood stacked in messy heaps alongside the trail. It was clear that the forest wasn't untouched. Someone had been working here, cutting trees and clearing the brush, but still felt wild and remote. As I moved deeper into the woods, the trail started to disappear, swallowed up by thick bushes and fallen branches. I decided to leave it and follow a narrow path made by animals or maybe people who didn't use the main route. The forest was quieter here, almost unnaturally so. The usual sounds of birds chirping or squirrels running up trees were missing, replaced by a kind of low hum from the wind passing through the branches. I didn't mind. It was peaceful, but also a little unsettling. After about 20 minutes, I stumbled upon something odd, a pile of branches and logs that had clearly been chopped and stacked recently. It was a slash pile, a messy heap left over from logging or clearing the forest floor. The wood was fresh and smelled strongly of sap. At the edge of the pile, something caught my eye. A small, worn shoe lay on top of the branches. It was a child's shoe, a little sneaker, faded and dirty, with one of the laces undone and trailing off the pile like it had been tossed there without care. I knelt down to look closer. The shoe was old, maybe weeks or months, but it was definitely a kid's. It was too small to be anything but a child's shoe, the kind you'd see on a 5 or 6-year-old. The sole was scuffed and the fabric was torn in a few places. The sight of it felt strange, almost out of place in such a wild, empty spot. I looked around, expecting to see a child nearby, but the forest was still and empty. Then I heard it, faint laughter. It wasn't a loud or clear sound, more like a soft, distant giggle carried on the wind. It was the kind of laughter a child might make while playing hide and seek, light and careless. I froze. The sound came again, a little louder this time, but still far off and impossible to locate. I scanned the trees and the brush, but there was nothing. No movement, no sign of anyone else. Just the quiet forest and the smell of pine. The laughter stopped. A heavy silence took its place, thicker than before. My skin prickled, and I felt a sudden chill despite the warm air. I stood up and looked back at the slash pile. The shoe still lay there, unchanged. I couldn't explain why, but my stomach twisted into a knot. The place felt wrong. I moved closer to the pile, careful not to disturb anything. I tried to think through what I was feeling. Had a child been here recently? Lost? Hurt? Did someone come after them? The thought was hard to shake. The forest was deep and isolated, and if a child had wandered here alone, it could be dangerous. The absence of any footprints or other signs was puzzling, but maybe the soft earth had covered them by now, or maybe the child had been carried away. I picked up the shoe carefully, turning it over in my hands. It was light, empty. I looked around again, the weight of the silence pressing down on me. The laughter hadn't come back. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting. I decided to keep moving, wanting to get out of the thick trees and back to the trail I'd lost earlier. But as I turned, I caught a movement out of the corner of my eye. A small figure, maybe a child, darted between the trees at the edge of my vision. I spun around fast, but there was nothing there, just the dense brush and shadows. My heart pounded. I told myself it was just a deer or some small animal, nothing more. But something about the way the figure had moved, too quick, too purposeful, didn't feel right. I stepped forward cautiously, following where I thought the figure had disappeared. The forest got darker as the sun sank lower. Shadows stretched long and thick, twisting between trunks. The silence returned, broken only by the crunch of my boots on dry leaves and twigs. The air felt heavy, almost humid, and I could smell something else now, something faint and sharp like burnt wood mixed with something sour. I came to a small clearing, a patch of soft moss surrounded by thick trees. The slash piles were more frequent here, like someone had cleared this spot carefully. At the edge of the clearing, I saw a faint trail of tiny footprints leading away into the trees. They were small, like a child's, but the dirt was soft and easily disturbed. The prints were fresh, no older than a day. I followed them, stepping carefully over roots and low branches. The footprints led deeper into the woods, winding between thick trunks and bushes until they stopped abruptly at the edge of a steep drop. A narrow ravine cut through the forest, its walls covered in moss and ferns. The bottom was hidden by shadows, and I could hear the faint sound of water, a small stream or creek running far below. I looked down the ravine. It was deep and dangerous. If a child had fallen here, it would be bad. I called out softly, but the only answer was the echo of my own voice and the distant rustle of leaves. A cold feeling settled in my chest. I scanned the edges of the ravine, hoping to see something, a toy, a piece of clothing, anything. But there was nothing. The footprints stopped too suddenly, like whoever made them had vanished into thin air. The sun was almost gone now, and the forest was growing dark fast. I knew I needed to get back to the main trail before night fell completely, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong here. As I turned to leave, the faint laughter came again, softer this time, almost a whisper. It seemed to come from all directions, circling me. I stopped and listened, heart racing. The laughter faded slowly, replaced by the deep, steady sound of the creek and the rustling leaves. I kept walking, my steps quicker now, pushing through the bushes toward the trail I had left hours ago. The forest closed in around me, the dark thickening with every step. I didn't look back. When I finally reached the trail, the last light of day was gone. The path was easier to follow now under the weak beam of my flashlight. I walked steadily, the strange feeling easing as the sounds of the forest returned. Birds calling in the distance, the occasional snap of a twig from a small animal. Later, at home, I tried to make sense of what I had seen. The child's shoe, the laughter, the footprints that vanished by the ravine. It was a puzzle I couldn't solve. There were no reports of missing children in the area, and the forest was rarely visited this late in the year. I wondered if the shoe had been there for months, left behind by some kid who had wandered close to the logging area. Maybe the laughter was an echo, a trick of the wind or the way the forest carries sound. But something about the whole thing stayed with me. The way the laughter seemed so real, but no child ever appeared. The way the footprints led to nowhere. The cold feeling in the pit of my stomach that wouldn't leave. In the end, I realized the forest was just a place where strange things could happen, and sometimes people leave behind pieces of their story without ever finishing it. That shoe was a sign, maybe a warning, that even in the quietest places, life goes on in ways we don't always understand. I never found out what really happened, but I know one thing for sure. Some mysteries don't need ghosts or fairy tales to be scary. They're scary just because they're real, and because sometimes the forest keeps its secrets well hidden. I was hiking alone on a quiet trail deep in the woods. The day had started out clear and bright, with the sun shining through the tall trees and lighting up the forest floor. I had planned this trip for weeks, wanting to get away from everything and spend a day in nature by myself. The trail was narrow and winding, the dirt soft under my boots, lined with ferns and patches of moss. Birds chirped somewhere high above, and every now and then a small animal rustled through the leaves. It felt peaceful, like the whole world had slowed down just for me. I kept a steady pace, my backpack snug against my back, the weight of water, snacks, and some extra clothes reminding me that I was prepared. The air smelled fresh, with hints of pine and damp earth. Every step I took seemed to echo softly, mixed with the sounds of the forest. I stopped once to take a drink from my water bottle, sitting on a fallen log and looking around. The trees were tall and thick here, their branches tangled and full of green leaves. Sunlight filtered through, casting moving patches of light and shadow on the ground. After a while, I got back up and continued. The trail started to climb a little, winding between rocks and roots that stuck up like broken bones from the earth. My legs worked hard, and I felt my breathing deepen. As I went higher, the trees grew thinner, and the sound of the birds faded away. The forest felt quieter now, heavier, like it was holding its breath. The air grew cooler, and I noticed a faint mist starting to curl around the trunks. I stopped again, wiping sweat from my forehead, and looked around carefully. There was nothing unusual, just the empty trail stretching ahead and the soft rustling of the wind in the branches. But then, just as I was about to start walking again, I heard it, a voice calling my name. It was soft, barely more than a whisper, but clear. My name, spoken slowly, with a strange, low tone that made my skin prick. I froze, my heart pounding hard in my chest. "Hello," I said quietly, looking toward the shadowed trees off the trail. Nothing moved. No sound answered except the gentle rustling of leaves. The voice came again, closer this time. It was just behind a thick stand of pines, their dark trunks standing like silent guards. The voice didn't shout or scream. It was almost calm, almost like someone was just trying to get my attention. But I knew I was alone. I hadn't seen or heard another person all day, and the trail was remote, miles from the nearest road or camp. I spun around, looking down the path I had come from, then toward the way I was supposed to go. Nothing. No sign of anyone. My skin was cold now, and I felt a tight knot of fear coil inside me. I told myself it was probably a trick of the wind, or maybe some animal mimicking a sound. But my gut told me otherwise. I started walking faster, my boots crunching on the dry leaves and twigs. I didn't want to look back, didn't want to listen for the voice again. But it came. A third time, louder, closer. My name, clear and sharp, right beside me now. It was coming from the shadows between the trees. I stopped again, frozen in place. The mist seemed to thicken, swirling around my feet. The air felt thick and heavy, like something was pressing down on me. I strained my eyes, trying to see into the dark underbrush. Branches and leaves moved slightly, but I still couldn't make out a figure. No footsteps, no sound except my own ragged breathing. Then I heard something else, a faint crack of a twig breaking. It was close, very close. Something was moving in the woods near me. My heart raced so fast, I thought it might burst out of my chest. I grabbed my phone from my backpack, my hands shaking, and tried to turn on the flashlight. The screen flickered before it finally lit up, the beam cutting through the mist. I pointed the light toward the sound. The trees stood like silent watchers in the circle of light. I saw a few small animals scurry away, a squirrel, a rabbit, but no people. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. Maybe it was just another hiker who had called my name as a joke, or someone else on the trail. I decided to keep moving, but I chose a different path, stepping off the main trail onto a smaller side path I had spotted earlier on the map. It looked like it would loop back to the main trail a little further up. I walked faster now, glancing over my shoulder every few steps, the beam of my flashlight sweeping through the trees. The forest seemed to close in around me. The mist wrapped around the trunks and stones like a living thing, thickening with every step. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the occasional snap of a branch underfoot and the low whistle of the wind through the trees. And then the voice again, right behind me this time, so close it was like a breath on my neck. My name, slow and low, almost a growl. I didn't stop. I ran. My feet pounded on the soft earth, and my breathing was ragged and loud in my ears. The path was steep and uneven, roots and rocks making it hard to keep my footing. I tripped once, catching myself just before I fell. The voice followed me, echoing in the trees, close enough that I could swear it was just steps behind. I scrambled up a small hill and saw the main trail below me, just a few yards away. Relief flooded through me. If I could get back to the main trail, maybe I could find my way out or meet someone. I pushed myself harder, my legs burning, my arms swinging. When I reached the main trail, I didn't stop. I kept moving, eyes scanning the woods on both sides. The voice didn't come again. I was sure I was alone. After what felt like an hour, I finally saw my car parked where I had left it, its dark shape barely visible in the fading light. I broke into a run, and the relief was overwhelming. I reached the car, unlocked the door with trembling hands, and jumped inside. I locked the doors and sat there for a few minutes, my heart still racing. The woods were silent now. No voices, no sounds but the gentle rustling of leaves in the wind. I tried to think clearly to make sense of what had happened. Had I really heard my name being called? Or was it just my mind playing tricks after a long day of hiking alone? I checked my phone for signal and called a friend. I told them I was on my way home and would meet up soon. I didn't want to be alone anymore. I started the engine and drove off, not looking back. Later, I thought about what had happened. I realized that it wasn't ghosts or anything supernatural. It was something much simpler. Someone had been out there, calling me, maybe lost or trying to scare me. But I never saw anyone. I never heard footsteps except my own. And whatever it was, it stayed hidden in the shadows. I learned to trust my instincts that day. When something feels wrong, even if you can't see it, you have to listen. And sometimes, the scariest thing isn't what's in front of you, but what you can't see just beyond the edge of the light. I had always liked the idea of going off the grid for a while, just to get away from everything. The noise of the city, the endless buzz of notifications, the crowds, all of it made me feel like I was constantly running on a treadmill. So one weekend, I decided to take a solo trip into the wilderness, somewhere quiet and remote. I packed a small backpack with the basics: water, some snacks, a map, a compass, a flashlight, small first aid kit, and my phone, though I knew there would probably be no signal where I was going. I chose a trail deep in the state forest about 2 hours from my apartment. It was a place I'd never been before, but had heard about through a few hikers' blogs. The trail was supposed to be challenging, but rewarding, winding through thick woods and alongside a narrow creek. The area was known for having few visitors, especially during the fall when the leaves started turning, which was perfect for what I wanted. The drive out was peaceful. I left early in the morning when the sun was just rising, casting a soft gold light across the road. The forest grew thicker the closer I got, and the air felt cooler and cleaner. I parked at the small dirt lot at the trailhead, grabbed my pack, and set off. At first, the trail was easy to follow. The ground was soft underfoot, covered in a carpet of fallen leaves that crunched with every step. The trees towered above, their branches rustling gently in the light breeze. The creek ran parallel to the path, its water clear and sparkling, occasionally splashing over rocks in tiny rapids. Birds called in the distance, their songs echoing softly between the trunks. I kept a steady pace, enjoying the solitude. I hadn't seen another person since I left my car, which was exactly what I wanted. After about an hour, the trail started to narrow. The trees grew closer together, and the underbrush thickened. The path became uneven, with roots and rocks jutting out. I had to watch my step more carefully. The light began to shift as I moved deeper into the forest. The sun slipped behind a bank of clouds, dimming the brightness. Shadows stretched long across the trail, and the sound of the creek grew louder. I stopped for a moment to catch my breath and take a drink of water. That's when I noticed something strange. The forest around me had fallen unnaturally silent. The birds had stopped singing. The wind no longer rustled the leaves. Even the creek seemed quieter, as if it had slowed down. It was like the whole world had paused. I shrugged it off. Maybe it was just a lull in the wildlife, where the wind died down. But then I heard it, a faint sound coming from just off the trail. It was hard to tell what it was at first, just a low, irregular noise. It wasn't animal, or at least not any animal I recognized. It was more like a dragging or scraping sound, slow and deliberate. I froze. My heart began to beat faster. I looked around, trying to pinpoint the source. The noise came from the thick bushes just a few yards away, on the right side of the trail. I strained my eyes, but the shadows made it hard to see anything. The sound stopped suddenly. I waited, holding my breath, but there was only silence again. The stillness felt heavier now, almost pressing in on me. I considered turning back, but I was already a few miles in, and the thought of retreating made me feel like I'd wasted the trip. I told myself it was probably just a fallen branch or a small animal moving through the brush. I started walking again, slower this time, every sense alert. My footsteps sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet. The air felt colder, the dampness settling into my bones. The trail twisted sharply to the left, leading uphill, and I had to climb over a fallen log that blocked the path. My hand was shaking as I grabbed the bark for support. At the top of the hill, I stopped to look around. The forest opened up a little here, revealing a small clearing. The sky was visible through the thinning canopy, a dull gray under the clouds. The creek was nowhere to be seen now. It must have looped away. I set down my pack to catch my breath and pull out my phone, hoping to get a signal. Nothing. No bars, no messages. Just a cold black screen. I slid it back into my pocket with a sigh. That's when I noticed the footprints. They were fresh, right in the clearing. Large, irregular, and messy, pressed deep into the soft earth and leaf litter. They didn't look like animal tracks. The size and shape reminded me of heavy boots, but they were too distorted, as if the person who made them had been dragging their feet or stumbling. I knelt down, brushing away some leaves to get a better look. The prints led from the far side of the clearing into the woods beyond, heading deeper into the forest. I felt a sudden chill, the kind that starts in your stomach and spreads outward. There was no way anyone else should have been here. I hadn't seen a single soul since I started. The area was known for being remote, and not many people came this far in. Yet here was evidence someone had been moving around recently. My mind raced. Maybe a hunter or a lost hiker. But why would they be dragging their feet like that? And why was I hearing strange noises a few minutes ago? The hair on my neck stood up. I stood and looked around, half expecting to see movement in the trees. But the forest remained still and silent. I picked up my pack and decided to keep going, following the trail as it wound through the woods. The footprints weren't on the main path anymore, but I kept them in the back of my mind. Maybe I'd see signs again. The trail began to descend now, steeply, the ground slippery with wet leaves. I had to steady myself with my hands on the trees. The creek returned, its gurgle louder as it rushed over rocks below. As I moved down, the light dimmed further. The clouds thickened, turning the day into something closer to dusk. The forest grew darker, the shadows deeper. The cold seeped through my jacket. I reached a narrow wooden bridge crossing the creek. The wood looked old and worn, but solid enough. As I stepped onto it, I heard a faint crack beneath my foot. I froze, then carefully shifted my weight and tested the boards. They creaked but held firm. Halfway across, I stopped and looked downstream. The creek was rougher here, swirling around rocks and fallen branches. The sound was louder, more aggressive. I started across again, but just then, something shifted in the trees behind me. A quick movement just out of the corner of my eye. I whipped around, but there was nothing. Just a forest, motionless. My heart pounded. I told myself it was a deer or a squirrel, something small that had darted away. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I hurried across the bridge and continued along the trail. It became harder to follow now. The path was faint, overgrown in places, covered by piles of wet leaves. My boots sank slightly into the muddy ground. Then the rain started. First, a few drops, then a steady drizzle. The air thickened with moisture. The forest floor grew slick and slippery. I pulled my jacket's hood up and moved faster, hoping to find shelter or the end of the trail. The trees grew even denser. Branches and leaves dripped water, the sound like a quiet tapping on my hood. The trail curved sharply and opened into a larger clearing. There, in the middle of the clearing, stood an old, abandoned cabin. It was small, barely more than a shack, with peeling paint and broken windows. The roof sagged in places, and the door hung slightly ajar. The wood was weathered and gray, covered with moss and vines creeping up the walls. I hesitated. The cabin looked like it hadn't been used in years. But with the rain coming down harder now, I needed shelter. I stepped forward, the ground squelching underfoot. I pushed the door gently. It creaked open more, revealing darkness inside. The smell hit me right away, musty, damp and faintly rotten. I pulled out my flashlight and clicked it on. The beam cut through the gloom. Inside, the floor was covered in dirt and leaves. Broken furniture lay scattered, a rusted metal bed frame, a smashed wooden chair, and a small table covered with dust. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling beams. I scanned the room carefully. Nothing moved. No signs of recent life, just the decay of time. I decided to stay inside until the rain eased. I found a dry corner to sit, leaning against the wall. The rain drummed steadily on the roof, loud and constant. After a while, I pulled out my water bottle and took a sip. My hands were trembling from the cold and nerves. The silence inside the cabin felt heavy, almost alive. Then I heard it again, a noise from outside, not the rain or the wind. Something else, a scraping sound, slow and deliberate, coming from just beyond the door. I froze, my breath catching. I held my flashlight tightly, shining it toward the door. The light hit the porch for a moment, illuminating wet footprints leading away from the cabin. They looked like the ones I had seen earlier in the clearing. My heart pounded in my chest. I knew then I wasn't alone out here. The footprints moved away from the cabin into the forest. I debated following them or staying put, but my body was frozen. I could feel the cold sweat on my back and the tightness in my chest.